Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. This is episode number 5 of our minor league overview, season review. I don't know what we're even calling it. I think I've called it something different every episode, but I'm Spencer Michaelis. We're here with our final episode, back with Joseph. Joseph, how you doing today?
Doing well. It's going to be nice to wrap up and fully transition into the 2025 season, at least mentally. And we're going to close with the Sounds. So here we are. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Joseph said, we're going to close with Nashville Sounds. For the record, before we even get too far into this, we are only going to touch on players who are returning to the Sounds and played, or at least in our tiering system, we're only going to touch on the players who are returning to the Brewers system and played for the Sounds last year. So we'll go through. There was a ton of turnover, so we're going to go through some of those names as well and make sure we give them some love if we didn't already in the first episode of the series. But overall, this episode is kind of going to be closing up some loose ends from what we've had throughout the entire series. We had a ton of questions from listeners that we weren't able to really find a spot for. So we're going to start this episode with just a very quick international signing review. I went through a bunch of the players on the main podcast with Jack just a few days ago. Joseph's just going to give a little bit of an overview on what the signing class is and what it means and maybe why they signed some of the certain positions, everything else along those lines. Then we're going to jump into a bunch of those overarching questions that I mentioned. We have a ton of them. Like I said, they weren't really specific to certain teams, so we waited till the end here. We're going to go through all of those, make sure we don't miss any of them, and make sure all of you get your chance to get your questions answered, at least to the best of our abilities. Then we're going to jump into our Sound season review. We'll tier the pitchers and the position players like we have been on all the other episodes. We have some specific questions for the Sounds as usual. And then we have a couple more questions at the end, and we'll do a little wrap-up of everything we talked about. But yeah, we can jump in here right away with, I think, a little overview of the international signing period. Like I said, I have 2 threads on Twitter if you want to check them out with a bunch of info on a bunch of the players. I talked about a good chunk of the players on the podcast, but Joseph, want to talk through kind of what the signing period was, how it went for the Brewers, and maybe why they went the direction they went with some of these guys?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to also point people, we tend to, as the regular season of the minor leagues closes, we create a international signing class thread. So we've been active in that on the forum since September. And that was kind of kicked off by Kurt Hoag's post on one of the, we talked about this earlier in the series, and I'm not going to get into individual players. We're going to learn about them through the Dominican Summer League, and you'll be seeing plenty of that in our reports. And we'll also have holdover from previous draft classes or signing classes, excuse me. But I do want to talk about what we started off the series in entirety talking about, the abundance of depth that the Brewers have in the lower levels, in that essentially age 17 to, I'd say, like age 20, 21. Just a massive amount of talent in that area. However, what we have said repeatedly is that as a system, the Brewers lack premium outfield depth. What did they do? They went out and targeted numerous athletic outfielders in this class. There's plenty to be said about these players. You can find that all over our forums or Spencer's threads and various other areas. But I just want to point that to you all as just an overarching theme. They went after athletes with different qualities, but they can largely play all over the outfield grass. So the signing class, it's been universally seen as potentially a top 3, which is remarkable, all things considered. And it just speaks to the impact of the Dominican Academy and the ongoing efforts that the organization as a whole has done in terms of recruiting these young players. And again, also going back to, as Brewers fans, as we start to come to understand the breadth of the organization, this is a new area they are excelling in. And this is essentially this is the 3rd class. If we consider Churio's class, we have 2 more after, right? Or is it 4 more? Excuse me.
The 4th, yeah.
4th, right? Yeah. This is, they're starting to make a pattern here where they're getting very good players. And so we have a Jesus Mate, Luis Pena, Jose Anderson, there's just so many players. That doesn't even get into the Tyler Rodriguez's, et cetera. There's just a lot of talent coming. And this is just looks to be, after 2 teams finished above 500 last year in the DSL, none of them got in the playoffs, but they certainly performed in various capacities throughout the season. It looks to be another potentially winning season. But, it's a little early to say that. But I think the other thing that's exciting about this class, it seems like they may have, and granted, it's too early to say it, they may have gotten a couple premium pitchers. So that's pretty exciting as well. But that's just kind of the macro of it. We'll get into the nuance as the season progresses, and we'll see how these scouting profiles play out in real time. But I'm absurdly excited about this class.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think Baseball America listed them as a top 5 most interesting classes. But I think, just to mention quickly, or to hit on what you talked about there, I do think it's interesting. They seem to have gone a little bit heavier on pitching, and they paid a little bit more to some pitchers than they normally do. Mm-hmm. I know it's something Arnold has even mentioned in a couple of his media availabilities, that they do hope to be a little bit more active in the pitching department. It's something MLB as a whole has struggled with in the international world, and obviously for understandable reason. It's a lot of 15, 16-year-olds. When you're looking at draft eligible players, you're at least looking at 17, 18-year-olds. They're a little bit more mature. Their arms have had the ability to kind of grow with their body, and there's a lot more that can happen with a younger player. But I think it's going to be a concerted effort to be more active in the pitching department when they make these signing classes moving forward. And that doesn't mean they're going to be getting the $1 million bonuses, but you might start seeing the bonuses creep up a little bit, and that would not be a big surprise to me. And then, like you said, they went for a lot of outfielders, and they went for a lot of up the middle guys like catchers and shortstops, and that's not surprising. They do that in the draft. Yeah, at least 3 catchers. It might be 4. And yeah, a bunch of shortstops. I mean, a lot of those guys will obviously play second or third or whatever, but the belief is most of those guys can move around. They're usually the best athletes on the field, so it gives them a little bit more versatility. It allows them to move around and find the spot that fits them best. So it'll be very interesting to see how some of the DSL lineups shake out, who's playing where. But I agree. I think it's another good class. This is the earliest I ever started digging into the class, because I was able to find a bunch of names prior to them actually signing, which is a different subject, and it's not the best system in the world. But it was fun to at least have an idea of what was coming up. And I think they've got a decent chance of hitting on a pretty big one here again, and then a couple others that have a pretty good chance to be good prospects. And then there's always some breakouts. The Juan Baez's of the world, who signed for $10,000, and Jefferson Cairo wasn't a big signing bonus. He wasn't tiny, like 10,000, but it wasn't a big signing bonus. Jose Anderson, like you mentioned, was 60,000 last year. They'll find some names that you might not be fully aware of or as excited about heading into the DSL. And then at the same time, there's going to be some guys who underperform. You don't hit on any prospects, and the younger they are, the harder it is to really kind of look ahead and see what they're going to do in terms of performance. But the Brewers are very good at this, like you said, and I think we can feel pretty good about it going into this season. And then, like you said, we'll check back in throughout the season, see how everybody's performing, keeping in mind that obviously the numbers don't tell everything. Like we saw with a guy like Quintana this last year, there was maybe a little bit more there than we would have thought just based on the raw numbers. So it's always hard, and people get excited about this, and then you kind of forget about the names because you don't hear about them for a couple of years. But we'll do our best to keep everybody informed on what's happening. And yeah, it's another fun class. But with that, we're going to jump into all of these questions that we got from you. I think we got at least 10, 12, something in that range of just questions that we haven't been able to fit in yet. So starting with user playing catch on Brewer Fanatic, he asked, my perception is that the Brewers are breaking into the enviable category of elite draft and develop organizations. Is this perception A, accurate, B, shared among the scouting community, and does it give them an artificial bump in the faith that scouts have that prospects will reach their potential if they are elite? How long before the league catches up? So I'll quickly answer the first part. I do think that this perception is pretty accurate. I think they're getting there. They're not perfect. They're not the best in baseball yet, but I think they're getting up towards the top. I think they're probably a top 5-ish team in terms of draft and develop in all of baseball, which is really good. It's a huge step from where they were. Even if you think back 6, 7, 8 years, it was not in that type of spot. So B, it does seem to be a thought that is shared among the scouting community. We had the scout, they had some different polls and questionnaire type things done on MLB.com probably a couple of weeks ago now. And the Brewers were at or near the top on a lot of these kind of drafting, developing, scouting type of polls in terms of how well they're doing in that regard. So it seems to be shared kind of league wide. And for me, I do think it gives a little bit of a bump in terms of how maybe, a Baseball America might view a certain player or a system, but I don't think it does enough to like shoot you up the rankings when it's undeserved. I think it maybe gives them a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. Maybe that's the best way to put it. But I don't know that it's something that like, I don't think Baseball America just goes, well, we see him as like 150th best prospect in baseball, but since it's the Brewers, we're going to put him in our top 100. Like for that example, like just to be kind of obviously over the top with it, but I don't think it's quite to that level. But I do think it gives them, okay, we're going back and forth on a guy who's in the Brewers organization and a guy who's in the A's organization. We think they're similar. We'll probably put the Brewers guy over him because we do think he's going to get better development. So I think that's more where that comes in. And then honestly, on the how long before the league catches up, I don't know that the Brewers tend to be on the cutting edge side of things. And I think the Brewers like to zig when the league zags. And I think if the league starts trying to do what the Brewers are doing, that the Brewers might go a different direction and find a different market inefficiency. And that just kind of seems to be the organization's MO, is to the way they do what they do is mostly by not behaving like the rest of the league. So I don't know that the league ever fully catches up. I'm sure some organizations, the Rays and other ones, operate similarly, but if it's something that becomes a trend league-wide, I don't think the Brewers will be hanging around to be there when the rest of the league catches up. I think that's kind of how I would phrase it. But Joseph, any thoughts on, I answered like 5 different things. I think there's like 5 different questions. Anything you want to touch on there?
Multifaceted question. Yeah. I think it goes, the fascinating thing is like, it goes back to the groundwork and the foundation that David Stearns helped establish. And, this is why, I celebrated when he got to go to his childhood dream team, the Mets. I celebrated because I knew he had done the Brewers good. So, it was a win-win. And, yeah, I think to your point there, I don't think the Brewers can afford to not zig when others are zagging. They have to. And that's just the nature of their organization. And as long as they have that Stearns foundation in place and evolving in real time with, Matt Arnold now and his staff, they're going to continually be poached because people are going to want their talent. But as long as they can continue to develop their own, they should, in quotes, be fine. And to that end, look at the Brewers now going back to the high school pitching ranks, right? They're one of those teams that's doing that again, where they avoided that for quite a while. And now they're back ostensibly targeting those types of pitchers, just as they're targeting now young pitchers from the international market. That was interesting. That's been an interesting development over the last 2 years. And I think what's fascinating about their entire way of operating is that they find these market inefficiencies and they become experts at it. And if that happens whereby other teams start identifying that and trying to copy that, I have no doubts that they're going to continue to scour further into that realm and find little edges here and there. And that goes back to like one of my earliest comments, that this is the golden era for Brewers fan. It is like, look at what they're accomplishing across the board with one of the lower third market caps. It's phenomenal. And I celebrate that. I don't have any worry about it. I don't care what the Dodgers are doing. I just don't. So good for them. I'll be in the Rebel Alliance and I'll happily support it. So Yeah, in terms of the scouting, as a macro of the scouting world at large, there's been things that have come out in the last year or two where it's become an even harder arena to have a career in.
Hmm.
Analytics is starting to drive the bus. Organizations are cutting costs, they're cutting salaries, they're asking for more out of the scouts that are there, more travel. Many of the scouts in kind of the broader market, MLB market interviews and anonymous kind of tidbits they gave were that they didn't know if their input was being received. So, one of the things I would note in that Baseball America publication that just came out about scouting and organizations is that the Brewers actually did kind of rank a little bit lower on terms of scout friendly. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. That's hard to say. You don't know who was interviewed. You don't know how many people were interviewed. So I don't put a lot of weight in a bunch of it. But I will say is that what the Brewers are doing and where they are placing their emphasis is working. So I technically don't even want to know what that is because I feel like it's kind of a secret recipe, right? It's like,
Yep.
so let's just let them do what they're doing. I'll celebrate it. I'll expose, fans to the players that I see on a daily basis, and I'm happy doing it. Will other teams catch up? Maybe. I don't put a lot of faith in it. I think the Brewers have a good thing going. They've built it up. They've now done it over 5+ seasons.
Hmm.
They seem to have a really good thing going. And I just, as a fan, as a lifelong fan, I just hope it continues happening. That's pretty much it.
Agreed. J78 Shot asked, "What do we do with the overload of seemingly talented pitchers, especially at AA and AAA? By my count, there are 8 or 9 guys who could be AAA starters and like 18 guys who could be relievers. On top of that, at the time of this question, we have only begun adding minor league contracts. So this was a question asked before we started this entire series. Um, there's been some subtractions. There's been some other additions since then. I think the main thing here is that it is going to be interesting to see exactly how they lay it out. For me, this isn't. There are so many things in minor league baseball that I am very interested in, and for me, I don't tend to dive into how are they going to line up the rotations and in different spots and everything else. Like for me, it's not as important as just they're going to figure that out and try and put the team in the best spot and also make sure these guys are getting developed as well as they can. So the only thing I'll say on that is they're going to make it work. Now, it wouldn't be shocking to see at some point a trade from some of that upper minors starting pitching depth, like a Carlos Rodriguez comes to mind for me, somebody who's already on the 40 man, especially. That's maybe the interesting part of it for me. And I don't mean to, it sounds like I'm ripping on the question. It's a good question. I think a lot of people are wondering that type of stuff for a lot of different levels. Just for me, it's not something I dive into much. So I don't know that I can give the best answer on that one. But Joseph, do you have any thoughts on how maybe they'll try and line up some of these starters, or some guys maybe repeating AA, maybe even some guys going from AAA to AA to make it work? Any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I think that if you consider that as a pool of players, off the top of my head, I think of Casey Hunt and I think of Brett Witrowski,
Mm-hmm.
and then I kind of stop. I mean, and it's
Yeah.
no offense to all the other players, but in terms of like, okay, these guys are on the MLB radar already, right? Like either one of those two could likely start with the Sounds, and we probably wouldn't blink. But then I go back to the Shuckers starting lineup. I don't see a single other starter there that I would conceive of starting in AAA off the top of my head. Tate Keener, no, he's going to start in AA. I love what Tate Keener brings, but he needs more experience. As to the relievers, well, we have a lot of guys there that I like, but if you consider how and we're going to get into this, but if you consider how the Brewers treat the Sounds and their pitching staff in
Mhm.
particular, we don't have all the pitchers that are going to come through there this season. We know that. And then we don't even consider the fact that likely the Brewers, they just got Ryan Sandberg's son from up in Montreal, which is exciting. He'll likely start in AA. He's performed there pretty well now for 2 seasons straight in championship seasons. But that's just the start. We know they're going to get likely, I don't know, I'd say off the top of my head, 2 to 3 guys going in the indie ranks. We know that's kind of how they operate. That's another market inefficiency they capitalize on. But my overarching point here is that, yeah, we have a lot of guys. Like, for instance, I love a Chase Costello. Absolutely. I consider him a premium reliever. It's same about Sam Gardner, but neither have sniffed AAA. And, You get in AAA, you get a lot trickier assignments. Look what happened with Blake Holub, who was lights out with Biloxi, lights out. He really struggled up in AAA, right? We look at a guy like Tyler Waisner, the same. Started out really well last year, then really scuffled, and then was ultimately an inconsistent bullpen arm for the Shuckers. So they have the guys and they have the horses because they need them, because they have to. How they operate at this AAA level is it's kind of like we'll get as many quadruple A, as I like to call them, guys that have the skills, have the raw tools. How will they shake out with a call up? We don't know. Prime example, there's James Meeker. He got his sniff at the major league level last year. He was released. Caleb Bosley, released. Now he's been kind of in the circuit of other ball clubs. So we have a lot of guys, sure, but I'm unconvinced personally that we know anything at this point. So we need those guys because we need the innings. We need to see how they've grown over an off season. How are they going to perform at spring training across the various spring training games? And they're going to add more. That would be my general point there. I'd say we're healthy. We're good. We have the arms. We have some guys coming back that are going to be healthy again, hopefully. And inevitably, then there's injuries, and there's also roster limits now down to the 165 stateside. So the AAA season we're going to get into here is going to speak to that as well. This is our first season. Yeah. Seeing what that does to the ranks, it's slim pickings. It's tricky. It's a tricky thing to do to shuffle those rosters. So that would be my overarching answer. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a good problem to have, really, is what it comes down to. It's not something that they'll probably be that stressed about. I would imagine they're going to feel fine with everybody just kind of getting the job done at AA and AAA, and the best performers go up to AAA, and the ones who don't really hold their ground at AAA end up in AA, or unfortunately maybe not with the organization. That's just how it'll end up working out. But our next question also comes from Playing Catch. He asked, and this is more of a 40-man related question, but what will Ernesto Martinez Jr. need to do in spring training to make the MLB roster? And how great would it be to see him become at least a serviceable left-handed first base /DH /pinch hitter /pinch runner? I guess to answer the first part, the fact he's not on the 40-man makes it, he would have to have an insane spring training, and I would guess that you would probably need an injury or two along the way as well from somebody for him to end up making the roster. But on the second part of that question, it would be awesome. And I do think it's something that he is capable of doing at some point, potentially this season. I think he could fit all of those roles, which is a weird role. You don't have too many guys who are first base /DH /pinch runner. That's not a very common one. You could argue Tyler Black could end up fitting into that role if he figures it out defensively at first base, but there are not many players who could potentially fill that role. And I do think that's basically what I would expect from him if he ends up making it up to MLB. So he's a very fun player. We've talked about him a lot, but Joseph, any thoughts on that for you? Do you think there's a chance he makes it out of spring, or and then just in terms of what the role would be, would you enjoy that? How fun would it be to watch that?
I don't think he will. It's the odds are just not in his favor. However, it's known, like, I absolutely love Ernesto Martinez. He's like one of the most fun players to watch. I just firmly believe that if he were, and when he is, fingers crossed, a Brewer, the crowd's going to love him. I can already see it. His first splits, grabbing a ball, people are going to just flip out because they haven't seen it before. He does it commonly.
Yep.
So he is on the right trajectory. So I don't have any concerns there. I think this is his 8th season. I mean, we've had him since he was about 16 years old, I believe. I mean, he's a lifer. That's a guy you just really desperately want to see make it to the big club. And it's all trending there. He's now had two seasons in a row of his best baseball, and he's hitting the ball harder than anyone in the system on a more consistent basis than anyone in the system. And there's still room to grow. Like, he's just finding those early sniffs of what it would be like to be a big league ball player. It's all trending. Will he make it out of spring training? I highly doubt it. That would mean there's a pretty big injury. He's just a little further down in the pecking order, even though, say what you want, I still think he's arguably the best pure first base prospect in the system today. We haven't seen Blake Burke really. So yeah, it's going to be a matter of time for him. I think he'll get serious sniffs next year as a potential call up. I really do. I
Mhm.
think it's set up that way. But to start the year, I would give it a 90 to 10 no. That
Yeah.
would be my.
Yep. Agreed. We got another question here from Beater GB. He asked, "Do we still have Tyler J? And if so, what are we thinking he brings?" I mean, keeping him and losing Shane Smith is a head scratcher for me. I'll answer the first part and then I'll let Joseph talk to the second part of this. But we do not have Tyler J. We did when you asked the question, but we do not any longer. He was DFA'd to make room for Grant Anderson when the Brewers made the trade for Grant Anderson. Jay got claimed by the Mariners, who are another good relief pitcher organization. So that was interesting to me. I always take
Yeah.
note of that. But Joseph, just on the subject of keeping him and losing Shane Smith, I know you had similar thoughts. So anything you want to share here?
Yeah, I still don't understand that one, and that's okay. I don't have to. Yeah, and that goes back, and again, as you know, I'll go back to TJ Shook. I didn't agree with it then. I still don't, but whatever. It is what it is. Clearly, he's coveted in some capacity. Former first round kind of guy, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Has the pedigree, but he's in his 30s, kind of know what he is now, and you have two very good reliever development orgs now who've had him and actually traded for him and now picked him up off the DFA off waivers. It'll be interesting to see how the season goes, but there and again, also it wasn't just the Brewers showcased that they believe in Vinny Capra's placehold on his roster spot, as well as Brewer Hicklin above and beyond, say, a Shane Smith as well. So that's all interesting. I didn't think Jay was going to be the guy released when they picked up Anderson, but here we are. Just a strange that the whole Tyler J as a Brewer experience is just kind of a strange one. Never really made sense to me. Didn't make sense going into the offseason. And today I'm also like, okay, so he was holding a place. Great.
Yeah.
But I wish him well. I wish him well.
Yeah. I think back to when they got him, I think the only thing I could come up with at the time was Brian Hudson was struggling and he had just gotten hurt. Hobie Milner was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Zastryzny was actually doing pretty well, but he had also had some injury issues and ended up rearing its head later in the season. They were kind of running out of lefties near the top. Koenig had an elbow scare near the deadline as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think they really just wanted somebody they thought could pitch from the left side and do it in MLB. So that's more where I think it ended up coming from. But yeah, it didn't end up being needed really. So in the end, it just looked like we gave up a somewhat interesting.
I agree with that. I agree with that
prospect.
sentiment. Like they were clearly looking to solidify that unknown, tenuous veteran lefty depth.
Yeah.
However,
And then in the end, it didn't matter.
and then
at
if you
all.
look at the way this offseason started, they essentially only were signing lefties for like a month.
Yep.
I was like, well, okay, we've swung even. No. So it was kind of fun.
Yeah. Then we got what do we have? Six more questions, I think, here. So these all kind of came back to more of like a minor league scouting or ranking type question. So we grouped them all together. First, Patrick asked, kind of open-ended, how do teams know when a prospect is ready to have an everyday role in MLB compared to signing a free agent or trading, especially on contending teams? I assume it's a combination of a lot of things, but just your guys' opinion on it. So Joseph, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, first you have to earn the opportunity, which in and of itself is, it's extremely challenging. The organization is seeing these guys day to day, so they know their work habits. They know how they're taking tutelage and instruction. They know how collaborative they are in the back and forth with the coaching staff. They know how they're handling their slumps, how they're bouncing back, how they're dealing with their bodies, their maturity, things of that nature. And then it's going to become a matter of how they interact in their clubhouse down yonder and how they interact in the clubhouse when they're given their first opportunity. Because working with the MLB coaching staffs it's an unknown. So as to when they're ready, I don't think you ever know. I really don't. If you've earned the opportunity, you're going to get the chances. I mean, just look at how Jackson Churio, to use an example, was struggling in the early part of the season. The way he can flip a switch is uncanny, and that is not the norm for most prospects or baseball players. That's why you have things like a superstar, and that's why he has the contract he does. However, you go to the other side of the clubhouse and you look at a guy like Mona, or Monasterio, as Murphy likes to call him, Mona, he has stuck due to the ingredient of being a clubhouse guy in a positive influence, I would argue, over his continued production. So once you've had some type of role and then you prove to be a clubhouse guy, you can also find a place. However, professional sports, if you're the end of the roster guy, you are always going to be challenged by getting an improved player to take your place. That's the nature of it. And so, I think the Brewers kind of straddle the line of all those worlds. They might have a guy who's ready, but they have a need. They might have a guy who projects to be a starter, like a TJ Shook, if all the cards lined up, but they have a need, and so they trade him. So, I think it's a fluid realm. I think it's an organic realm as well. I think it changes from one season to the next. I think it changes from 1 week to the next in a season, and it all depends. Because if you have a player that is an asset as a business, right? We know they're human beings. We know they're players, but you are an organization that's running a business. You need people to come through the gates. You need to get a return, et cetera, things of that nature. And so you are going to use your asset in quotes, and I'd hate to do it in that way, but you're going to use it in the manner of the context of a given season. And so I think it's constantly in flux.
Yeah, I agree. I think you touched on a lot of the stuff I was going to say. It's going to rely on what they've heard from coaches who are coaching these guys. It's going to be reliant on, I think you touched on a big one, how they react to slumps, how they bounce back from slumps, how they behave in the clubhouse when things aren't going well versus when they're going well. How are they as teammates? All of those things. The performance is what gets you the look. It's everything else that gives you, I think, the biggest chance of getting the call up. And I look back at Churio's AA season, and I think the Brewers saw what happened when he struggled in that first half, dealing with the pre-tacked ball and everything else. But he struggled the first half, and as the youngest player at the level, did not get bothered by it at all. He barely ever showed any negative emotion watching so many of those games. He seemed like a great teammate the whole time, and he came out in the second half and just went crazy, and he was fantastic. And I think the Brewers had to see that and go, all right, he's struggling in his first chance at the major league level, but we know that this guy can bounce back from it. We know that he can keep the right attitude and keep going. And we believe that the talent is going to start to show up. And obviously that was proven correct, as he was one of really the better hitters in the NL after June, or once June began. It's that type of stuff that gives you the extra edge over everybody's talented in the minor leagues, at the upper minors especially. What else can you show me that obviously some people are much more talented than others, and that's going to get them that opportunity, but the continued opportunity comes from all the little things that maybe we don't even get to see super often. And that's where they're going to have to rely on the coaching staff who's been with them. They're going to have to rely on having been there and watched them and the scouts and everything else that they know about the guy as a person. And even then, that'll sometimes slip through the cracks and they might be wrong about a guy, but that's how you get that opportunity. And the more they trust you as a person, if there's a situation where, okay, we could go out and get a 1-year contract for an outfielder here, or we can give Churio this opportunity right away off the bat, we know he can handle it mentally and maturity wise. We're going to give it to the guy that has the huge ceiling, the guy that we've developed, everything else. But if Churio was a head case when he was going through it in AA, and one, he probably doesn't get the extension in that scenario, but two, even if they were looking at him for this spot at the beginning of the season, they probably would have been a lot more open to going out and finding an external candidate because they just don't know if they can trust him at the major league level. So I think that is a very important part. It's one of the things we can have an idea of it watching games and doing everything else, but you have to be around the guy constantly to really know who he is, what makes him tick, everything else. And that stuff matters a lot. So I think that's honestly the biggest part of it when it comes down to it. But obviously you have to be a very good baseball player as well to get that opportunity. Next question, also from Playing Catch, he asked, is the MLB roster young enough and potent enough to allow the Brewers to be more patient with their prospects? Is there an organizational benefit to fast tracking prospects? So I think they can be patient because of the situation that they're in. They have a lot of talented players throughout the minors. But I actually think, for the reasons we just talked about, challenging prospects and moving them quickly is often the best way to go about doing things. Now, I think the Padres do that to too much of an extent, and they push guys to a point where they probably can't even, they have no chance of succeeding at the level that they're at. I think the Brewers do a very good job of it. You need to know how a guy reacts to struggling. You just have to. You can't get through all. I honestly think this is part of the Keston Hiura problem that he ran into in MLB. He never struggled in the minors. He hit at every level. There was a little bit of a jump in strikeout rate at every level, but he never struggled. He was crushing the ball at every single level. As soon as pitchers adjusted to him, he didn't really know what to do. I think he overdid some things to try and fix it. I think he overthought. He just didn't know how to react because he'd never dealt with it before. And that wasn't even the Brewers' fault. They pushed him very quickly. He just hit at every level. But I think overall, seeing some struggle is actually a good thing for most prospects. And like I already told this Churio story, I think it's a perfect example of the Brewers gaining a bunch of confidence in him because he struggled. I did watching him that season. That was when I went from like, this guy could be a star, to me basically going, I think he's going to be a star. Like, I really do think he's going to be a star. And I think you want to fast track guys at a reasonable pace. You don't want to push them 2 levels further than they can handle, because you can kill their confidence too. In the meantime, even if it's a guy with a good attitude and everything else, if they move too quickly and they just completely struggle, you can still kill the confidence to some degree. But I think the Brewers in particular have found a very, very good balance of how quickly to do it, when to do it, and who to do it with. And rarely has it really backfired or looked bad at any point. It usually pays off, and it usually gives you a better idea of who the prospect is, who he is as a player, and who he is as a person, and can he really handle everything he's going to need to handle to make it at the big league level. But Joseph, any thoughts on fast tracking prospects for you?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to all the guys are talented in this level of baseball. When you get into the professional ranks, it's about differentiating yourself, and it gets back to, again, that body language. I noticed, like, for instance, I think of a guy like Yoferi Rodriguez, who was promoted at the end of the season. His first high A at bats were in the playoffs, and he had some of the best at bats I'd seen from him all season. However, if you'd watched him the entire year, this was a young guy who was never phased, no matter how his at bat went, always gave 100%, always gave phenomenal defensive effort, and was that same player every day. And is one of the bilingual players, is very well spoken, is extremely together in this department, right? And you could tell it comes across. So a promotion like that, I was like, oh, this will be very interesting to see, and he rose to the occasion. Flip side of that is a guy like Dylan O'Reilly, where arguably, given his stature, his size, and just where he was as a player, I felt it was a little over aggressive. But that's what the organization chose to do, and here we are, and it'll be essentially year 1.5 down in Biloxi. I think the Brewers have come a long way in terms of moving guys a little quicker, but I think also that's because they're getting better players. And I think where they are as an organization, they kind of have to be in that neutral, aggressive place, because they have those constraints with the salary cap of their organization. I should say there's no cap, as we all know. So I think that they're in a good spot with that. You get a guy like Cooper Pratt, that way that draft worked out with Batanti, getting Adam Shefsky in there as well. You get these high school guys, you can take these gambles with these high upside guys, hope that your system of development can handle that. And then if they're showing that they're capable, like, for instance, Jason Woodward, if Jason Woodward's healthy, I have no doubts today he could pitch in Double-A. Zero.
Yeah, agreed.
That's what I saw in the very few glimpses I saw. When I saw Craig Yoho, I told people the first week I watched him as a reliever, he is an MLB pitcher today. Yeah. I stand by that. Mizorowski, you understood why he was being held in Double-A because of his control issues. It made sense. Casey Hunt, given his age and what I saw in those first 2 weeks in the Mudcats realm, I knew this is going to be a fast mover. And so if I can see it, just because I'm watching the games, I guarantee the Brewers see it. Yeah. They know it. So I think they're just marrying that extremely well right now, and it plays into where they are as an organization. So,
yeah, 100% agree. We got a couple questions from playing catch on maybe some of the more like StatCast related, advanced stats related stuff. He asked, do you expect to see StatCast like data to become available to AA ball, rookie ball soon?
If
Man, I have
only.
no idea, but I hope so. I really hope so. It would be awesome. It'd be something that would make all of this a lot easier for not that you don't want to base everything around StatCast data. There's a lot more to it, but it can help you start to weed out some guys that there are certain profiles that just won't work and they probably won't ever work. And when you start to see some of the hard hit ball or hard hit data and exit velocity and stuff, and you can kind of go, okay, there's been like 2 major leaguers to ever make that profile work. When you have that data available to you, it makes it a little bit easier to know, because when you're watching a game live, you can tell when something gets crushed, but a line drive looks similar on a mediocre minor league camera, no matter who hits it for the most part. Now, there are some Luke Adams line drives that look different than Dylan O'Ray line drive, and he's hitting it a lot harder than O'Ray was, but at the same time, you do get a lot from that type of data, and it would be really nice to have it. I'm hoping it at least starts to trickle down like a level at a time. We got AAA. I'm hoping maybe we get AA soon. The tough part is that all the AAA stadiums have actual StatCast cameras.
Yeah.
The rest of the levels have TrackMan cameras, and that's a lot different. It's a lot different. So it was easy for them to, AAA was always available. You just had to put the box score ID in, and you could find that box score's StatCast data. Now they just made it a lot easier to access it, so everybody has access to it a lot easier. But the lower levels use it completely different. They use TrackMan, or they use I can't think of what the other one is, something but either way, it's a different system, which makes it a lot harder for them to kind of put it out there to the public, is my guess. And I think some teams just don't want their players to have their information public to other teams. I know the Brewers, when they were doing the COVID year, whatever they called it, when they were in Appleton, teams could choose to share their prospect data or not, and then they would get access to everyone else's. The Brewers opted out of that because I think they didn't want everybody to know exactly what their guys were capable of down there or up there, I guess. But it would be great for us. I don't know that I see it super soon. Joseph, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I mean, it would be amazing. I could go over to Baseball Savant and I wouldn't just accidentally click on AA and have nothing.
Yep.
Yeah, it would. Oh gosh, it would be so great. As is, I have to rely on the game by game announcers and what they offer via their telecast.
Yeah.
And man, I tell you, I go back and I review certain games and I'll rewatch a telecast because I'll have a note that's like, oh, 5th inning, they gave me something. And I'll go back and I'm like, oh man, I must have misheard that, wrong game of the week. Anyhow, it's really, I spent too much time doing that, arguably. But I want to know, for instance, like to the Jason Woodwards, I wanted to hear when Anthony Flores first came up. I reached out to some road announcers to ask, had he touched 90? Because I had heard that he hadn't, and he had a couple times, which I was like, oh, okay, good. But yeah, to have that data would be, for guys like us, would be amazing. But to your camera point, but also, it certainly seems as though organizations aren't trying to add costs to these lower realms, unfortunately. And so will it happen? Maybe. If it did happen, it would happen like Spencer says, it would go to AA first. MLB works in that capacity where they trickle things out over years.
Yeah.
And so even though everybody and their grandmother knows that all AAA players like the replay challenge system, it works incredibly well. It's favored by players and clubhouses, all the staff. When is it going to come to MLB? If it comes, maybe 2 years.
Yep.
They could have instituted it last season. So I'll believe it when I see it. It's my short answer there.
Agreed. Same kind of realm here from Playing Catch. He asks, are there personal eye test or stat related indicators that each of you have that make you fall in love with or mitigate your enthusiasm for a prospect? So I'll quickly touch on a couple here. Whiff rate and ground ball rate on both sides of the spectrum often tell a lot for me. I think a pitcher who gets a lot of whiffs and a lot of ground balls is often going to be doing a very good job at his job. And hitters who have a high ground ball rate and high whiff rate are naturally going to concern me as hitters. It's always been the thing with Garrett Mitchell that has worried me the most, is that's kind of the profile for him. It's not everything. There are guys who can work around it. A guy like Mitchell, because of his speed, can live with the ground ball rate, and when he does hit it in the air, he hits for power, so that can help you get around some of these things. But those are really big things. And then for an eye test thing, what we talked about a lot already is handling failure and stuff. As much as I can see that, I'm looking for that. I want to see how guys handle adversity and how when things don't go their way. But just generally, baseball IQ, I do put a premium on. I think guys who make the right plays, who know what they're doing on the bases, who are, when I go to games, I want to see who's moving around every pitch. I want to see guys who are backing up bases and doing the small things, because that engagement is going to lead me to believe that they can handle everything over the course of a 162 game season, a full, it's a grind. It's a long, long time. And you have to be able to do all those small things consistently. And so I'm looking for stuff like that, especially in person. It's a lot easier to see that. That was like the only positive of the Shuckers camera that we got early in the season, was that you actually could see everybody moving around and some of that stuff. So it gave you a little bit of an idea on how guys operate. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, obviously, it's just everything else. If it's a really nice looking swing, I can live with some other issues, because I think they're going to figure it out eventually. And um, hustle is another one I probably should bring up. Guys who, part of the reason I just have this feeling Luke Adams is going to figure it out long term is because he just goes 100% at everything he does. And those types of guys tend to be able to make it work at some point. Now, it doesn't mean he will, but those are all the things I look at. There's more too, but, and I actually skipped the question I meant to ask here, but we'll touch on this one first. So, Joseph, anything for you that specifically stands out in terms of eye test or stat related things that you really
yeah,
value?
as I've said on more than one occasion, there are numerous guys at Brewer Fanatic who dwell quite more expertly in certain capacities of, the pitch maps or certain advanced statistical overlays. I absolutely operated from "Do you catch my eye" first. I watch so many players in a given season. I kind of have my own criteria for what pops, and this gets to my love of Jader Arenamo. I mean, I have watched him since day one stateside. Just his intellect on the baseball diamond is unmatched by any other player in the system. I'm just telling you, his mental acumen about how he reads the ball off the bat, how he reads scenarios that are happening defensively, an ascending hitter, all of the things. So to that end, that is why I don't concern myself as much with his current bat hitch, just because I know the greater makeup of who he is as a player. To your Luke Adams point, same thing. Loved by teammates, loved in the clubhouse, absolutely positive attitude to the gills, always shows up with a positive attitude, an insane athlete. So you look at his swing and potentially his lack of swings that we've talked about, and his over reliance on getting plunked or taking walks. I have faith that even if I have question marks, he has the right attitude to meet the challenge. So whereas a guy like Joey Weimer, who we had in the system, who I doubted could handle that because he seemed as though he may have some issues with processing the recovery mentally, which have bore out for the last season plus.
Yeah.
Not that that's the player he's going to be. I don't know. But with Luke Adams, I see a guy who's just going to meet that with a positive attitude. And so it's a different type of mental makeup. A guy like Manuel Rodriguez, I don't look at FIP meaning anything with him right now. I think his FIP is probably over 4. I don't even know. FIP to me as a stat is contextual. So if I see a guy who I know is pinpoint accurate, day in and day out, he's pitching more innings than pretty much anyone at his age at that level. And he's given you these epic performances on a week in, week out basis. I'm going to let FIP slide to the back burner, and I'm going to focus on how he's consistent in his release point, how he's mastering, how he's approaching hitters, and his mental side of his game first and foremost. And then the question for me, if I'm scouting him, is can he add a couple ticks? Where will he go? If he can't, he'll probably face challenges, things of that nature. But I always start with the eye test. That's how I found Casey Hunt. That's how I found Craig Yoho in my own realm. That's how I found Jader. That's how I found Lara originally. And also with Lara, I know I don't care about his offensive output over a season because I see the spurts, but I also know he's beloved. He's invited back to the MLB training camp. Had a great AFL. The feedback that you heard and then shared with me back there was super positive. And defensively, he's an ace. And so you're looking for players like that who have these characteristics that you can't find elsewhere, and then you're hoping to build off of that. And so I will always start with the visual, and I will wait multiple games and multiple months before I actually form, a real opinion. And then the flip side to that would be like a guy like Ethan Murray last year, where I'm like, was he injured? Because he's too good of a player to have that type of season with that lower mobility. And so we'll see what this year brings. And so guys like that, where you saw them overcome some adversity, high A to double A, put his name back on the radar, and then have a struggling year, or an Eric Brown Jr., you give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's see what they have in a whole new season, new landscape, new context. Can they bounce back? So that's where I kind of look at that.
This was the question I was being to ask. Along the lines of the StatCast, he, from playing catch as well, he asked, what free or inexpensive advanced data websites do you follow? So I'll note first that through Brewer Fanatic, we have a bit of a cheat code that gives us access to True Media, which is very nice. It gives us a lot more in-depth statistical stuff than we can get from just, it'd be stuff you'd pretty much have to do manually. A lot of it, like whiff rates and everything else at the lower levels that we would not normally be able to get to. But for me, I'm probably not the best one on this. I subscribe to too many things. And mostly just because for me, if I value what you're putting out there, I believe that I should support you. So I subscribe to TJ Stats on Patreon. He does a ton of great stuff with all the StatCast data that we get from AAA and MLB. It's a pretty reasonable cost. I want to say maybe $5 a month. Baseball America doesn't give access to everything, but they have access to all those minor league TrackMan data sets that we just talked about. So there's a ton of good information that they put out there. If you're looking for minor league advanced data, that's probably going to give you the most for these lower levels is Baseball America, because they're not going to give you like a full database that you can look through and just find whatever you want to find. But throughout the season, there's a lot of really good stuff in terms of articles and what they put out there. That's where you find a lot of the exit velocity information for younger guys. And there are other people too. Like I said, I subscribe to a lot of Patreon, some Substacks, those types of things. Prospects Live usually has some pretty good stuff on their Patreon. Prospect Tilt is one of my favorite Substack ones. They kind of, I think they got really busy this year during the middle of the season. So maybe the quantity of stuff that came out fell off a little bit, but they watch a lot of games, and then they also are able to get their hands on a decent amount of data. We'll talk about Logan Henderson later, but he was the one who pointed out to me that the velo had jumped a bit this year. He had been able to get his hand on some of the data that showed that he had a much better shape on the fastball than he had before. So that was one other one. And then Lance Brozdowski, I want to say it is, who also puts a bunch of great stuff on YouTube. There were some things that Ernesto Martinez, some Luke Adams data that came up in some of his videos throughout the offseason. But you can find it if you search hard enough. That's, I guess, maybe the main point. I try to share what I can. Again, I don't want to overstep on what other people are sharing, because I believe they deserve to be compensated for what they're sharing and what they are able to get their hands on. So I don't want to go step on toes in that way or anything, but what I can share that I find, I do share. But it's out there. It's not the greatest availability for minor leaguers, unfortunately. RotoWire does some pretty good stuff as well. I don't have a subscription to them currently, but I have in the past. It's funny. It's actually a lot of fantasy related sites that I think tend to do the best job with it, because those guys are always looking for huge advantages, that whatever they can find for advantages in the fantasy world for dynasty baseball, which is a even bigger community than I ever would have imagined. I've learned over the last few years. There are a lot of people who are crazy about dynasty baseball, which I love that. But yeah, I guess my overarching thing is it's not the easiest thing in the world to find. You can find it if you search hard enough. For me, I think the main kind of, I don't know what the main one is Baseball America. If you're looking for information you're never going to get in too many places, because I do think they share the most in terms of like StatCast type data for the younger guys. And I don't know of a good site that does whiff rates and everything else that isn't relatively expensive. So I can't give maybe the best answer on that, but at least I threw out a bunch of different things. So Joseph, do you have any that you've been able to find that I didn't mention?
I really like Strickland's player cards. Those are fun, and he just those are fun just because they're color coordinated, and I'm a very visual person, and so if I see dark red, I'm like, ooh. So, and I know he just expanded that to more of the minor league offerings. I know that Javik Blake just shared that, which I was like, oh, that's so cool. I spend most of my time, if I'm dabbling in that realm, again, like the vast majority, I mean, for Brewer fans, it's your benefit. I'm just watching the guys, and I'm forming my opinions based on that. Like I didn't need to be told that Ernesto Martinez was an elite exit velocity. I watch him. He smokes the ball. It's abundantly obvious. And so if people who haven't seen him want to see that and go, wow, great, I'm going to celebrate and share that. But I already knew that, frankly. However, I spend time at Fangraphs. I love Fangraphs. I'll go in there. Baseball America as well. I'm a Plus subscriber. But I'm focused pretty much primarily on the Brewers players. I'll even to the point where, I follow them into other organizations. Like that's how I knew Grant Anderson. I was watching Antoine Kelly in Frisco, like in the AA for the Rangers. And I was like, who's this guy? It's such a cool delivery. And so I was so stoked when the Brewers got him on this offseason, and not based on anything in 2024. I was 2023 and before. So yeah, that's pretty much. So I don't spend to answer that just like concisely. I don't spend a whole lot of time. I just, my thing is like, I want to form an opinion on our players as I watch the games, and just give people an early heads up on guys who I think are popping. And because I watch so many guys, I tend to be on that a little earlier than most. I would just say, I think it's fair to say. And so hopefully that helps. Hopefully that offers something. But to the finer points, I just stick with Fangraphs primarily. Baseball Savant in season for AAA. Baseball America. I don't even use the True Media, because I'm not focusing on that in my daily reports. If I spent daily reports, the link reports, worrying about bringing in advanced statistical analyses of these individual players, I would probably spend even more obscene amount of time on these reports than I already do. So I might get kicked out of the house. So yeah, but you offer. I mean, just listen to what Spencer had. He gave you a number of things to look at there.
Yeah, I didn't even mention Fangraphs. I use Fangraphs all the time. I guess for me, those were more, for the most part, those are more not as advanced. I was thinking more along the lines of
they're not
fully advanced, but they do have like weighted runs created plus, which you don't find anywhere else.
Do.
For
and it's fun. The one thing I like about Fangraphs is I can create an entire table of our prospects, and I can sort. So that's fun. At the end of the season, like if I wanted to, like I was like, why are these FIP numbers I'm hearing not reading out from what I'm seeing and what I feel, and then I would put it in a table. I'm like, interesting, okay.
Yeah.
But as we get into whiff rate with the Sounds, this is why I was way higher on Chad Patrick than most. Chad Patrick was leading all of the International League in whiffs. He had 4 21 plus whiff outings in like 45 plus swing, like 45 to 50 swing. I was just like, I was on him way earlier than others, where he had a 19 against Norfolk. The guy was getting whiffs. So anyway, we're going to speak to that later.
Yeah. And our last one before we start getting into some of the tiering that we're going, well, the review actually of the season first, but Brian Giles asked, general question, what's your philosophy behind how you rank prospects, floor versus ceiling, position player versus reliever, how far up they are on your minor league ladder, etc.? For example, you seem confident that players like Craig Yoho, Casey Hunt, or Yadier Arianamo will be major league players. what keeps them from being ranked higher than a player like Braylon Payne or Luis Pena, who have yet to quote unquote prove it? So I'll give a quick answer here. It's probably a bit of a cop out. The honest answer for me is that it's a balance between finding those things, and it's hard to really quantify it or say exactly what it is. But I think you have to factor in everything you talked about, the relative likelihood of them hitting the ceiling that they have. And then it's just a bit of a game from there in terms of like, okay, like you said, maybe a position player that I view overall value-wise similar to Craig Yoho, I'm probably going to put the position player a little bit ahead of him just because I think you're going to get more value out of what he does. But it's like I said, I don't know that I can give you the best answer because there's a lot of different things. It's all very case by case for me. And really, I guess my main thing would be that as fun as rankings are for me, it's more about the tiers that they're in when I'm doing my rankings. I'm going to have different tiers. And if I could have 20 players that are in the same tier and it would look like they're separated by 20 spots in my rankings, but in reality, I could probably flip those two in my rankings and feel the exact same as I do about them at that time, and it wouldn't really mean anything new. So that would be my main thing. The rankings are fun, and they're a great talking point when everybody does them for Pipeline and Fangraphs and Baseball America and Baseball Prospectus, and everybody's got a ranking. But in the end, it's more about, for Fangraphs, there could be 5 different guys who are 45 future value. I view all of those guys in their mind, I think they do too, as basically in the same tier. And you could argue for any of those guys to be above the other. So that's, I guess, maybe again, it's probably a bit of a cop-out answer, but that's the honest answer for me. I don't have a real like formula that goes into it for certain positions, certain people. Like it's a case by case thing on everything, but you do have to weigh everything you mentioned. It all comes into account. Joseph, what about you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my general sentiments on rankings. I think that beyond the top 5, they're generally meaningless, honestly. I say that in terms of, we never know when these players' light bulbs are going to go on. We just don't, and we never know where their final plateau is. And so, like, for instance, if we look at the Brewers, we know they're going to bring in a bevy of, back to my quadruple A guys, we know they're going to bring in a bevy of those, and they're going to get opportunities. And can they make that opportunity happen when they get to that level? That's the big unknown. None of us know. As to the original question about why a Luis Pena or a Braylon Payne are rated higher, well, if you watch Braylon Payne play and you saw that athleticism and he has that work ethic, that attitude, that can do, and he's got these 5-tool athletic gifts, hitting 105 plus off the bat as an 18-year-old lefty in his first pro ball, stealing 4 bases in heading to the playoffs. I mean, this kid has something different, this young man. I mean, it's abundantly obvious. Luis Pena, I think we have a little bit of we had a little bit of the post-Jackson Churio hype train there, but also he had an incredible season. And as we know, arguably as a whole could have been considered better than Jesus Made, who's being considered a potential number 1 overall prospect down the line, right?
Yeah.
So, if those things are happening, the exit velos are happening at that age, that's going to be a higher ranked player. Will Jader ever be a professional player? I don't know if he'll ever make it at MLB level. What I do know is that he has an acumen and an intelligence and a way of playing baseball that's poetry. And I love watching him. So that's with Yoho, that type of player, you have players like him that have unicorn traits. It's like the Tanner Shears splitter. There is not another pitcher in baseball who throws that pitch. And I've watched countless guys at every level absolutely flail at it. So I also know with Craig Yoho, he's had major injuries. He was a field player. He didn't know if he was going to play baseball again. He completely reinvented himself and became essentially a top 3 reliever in all of minor league baseball. I'm going to buy heavy in that stock, that he's going to make it to the major leagues and he's not going to blink. And so if you have those elite outliers, I think you have a better odd, because teams will always try to find a niche to fit that pitch in or that dominance into some type of high leverage situation. So I think that plays there. But to the overarching question about how I rank players, frankly, I really don't. I have fun with the tiers because I want to know Do I classify a guy as a reliever down the line? What type of reliever? Do I see him as a starter? Why? But beyond those top 3 to 5 guys, to me, you can just switch guys in and out. And I think that as a whole prospect, people are going to rely heavier on youth because there's an unknown, untapped potential there. So,
yeah, agreed. So we have a few more questions. We're going to stick till the end on those because they're kind of opinion based and they touch on some AAA guys, and we don't want to talk about those guys before we get through this Sounds review. So we will move to the season review here for the Sounds. This was one. Pull up the graphic if you're watching again on YouTube, but another one where we've gone through this with every team. They actually ended up 10 games over 500 in this scenario. They're the only full season team who didn't make the playoffs, which is funny compared to the Shuckers, who had a much worse record but did end up making the playoffs just due to the way that it is designed in the Southern League. And we went through that a little bit. But for the Sounds, a 78-68 record, which is pretty good. And we'll go through in a second just how many guys were cycling through the team and the organization. And just there was a lot going on in Nashville this season. And it started off not great. It was 13-15 through April. They started in March. They start basically the same time as MLB does. 13-15. Then they went 16-11 in May. So now they're 3 games over 500. A 12-14 June. 13-9 in July, 15-12 in August, and then 9-7 in September. So they had a really good second half. They did a lot of good things, like I mentioned, with guys going up and down between AAA and MLB, with guys coming in and off of the roster all season long due to DFAs, waiver claims, trades, just everything. There were so many guys. And then also, towards the end of the season especially, a lot of guys who were coming up from the lower levels to make their debuts at the AAA level. So I'm going to throw a graphic up again for the people watching, but there were just a ton of names who cycled through. We talked about most of them in the first one, so I'm just going to read off all the names here just to give an idea. But on the position player side of things, players who are no longer with the organization, who were on the Sounds roster at some point last year: Patrick Dorian, Brian Navarretto, Christian Arroyo, Peyton Henry, Chris Roller, Joey Weimer, Francisco Mejia, Carlos D. Rodriguez, Chavez Young, Noah Campbell, and Nick Colley. On the pitching side of things, we had J.B. Bukowskis, who was just DFA'd a few days ago, Yoel Kunal, Nolan Blackwood, Jansen Junk, Inoli Paredes, Kevin Herget, Harold Chirino, Vladimir Gutierrez, Corbin Martin, James Meeker, Daryl Thompson, and Nick Bennett. All of those guys spent time on the Sounds. All of those guys are no longer in the Brewers organization. Some of them were obviously traded midseason, like a Joey Weimer. Some were DFA'd midseason. Some of them recently were leaving the organization, like Carlos D. Rodriguez, who was signed by the Braves. Bukowskis was DFA'd. Inoli Paredes was DFA'd right at the end of the regular season. Just a lot of different names who cycled through. So we've talked about it for other teams as well, but I think AA was similar in terms of the people that went up and down and everything else, but they didn't have nearly as many people leaving the organization completely as the Sounds did. Joseph, just looking at this list and then kind of looking at the season as a whole, what stood out to you from the Sounds? What stood out from these guys who cycled through? Obviously, some of these guys were very helpful to the Sounds. Some of them maybe not so much, but a lot of roster turnover throughout the season.
Isn't Nick Caley still with the org?
Is he?
I believe so. I think Nick Caley is still with Biloxi. We should probably confirm that.
Yeah, I'll make sure.
As we know, the minor league paperwork at this time of year can be very odd. As we know, Owen Miller is no longer a Brewer, but according to the Rockies paperwork, Owen Miller is still on the Sounds and is nowhere remotely close to the Rockies org, even though we know he is. It's very odd. I'm pretty sure Nick Caley was not up for free agency. Yeah,
it does show him still in the organization. Yeah.
The thing with Nick Caley, if anyone paid attention to the Sounds last year, he was up with the Sounds early in the season because they were dealing with injuries. So he spent like a month. He had 16 or so games, and he even pitched an inning, scoreless, might I add, for the Sounds. Heck of a late guy to eat some innings. So yeah, what's interesting is that early in the season, they had their inaugural month was a sub 500 record. However, there's at least 3 games in there where I'm like, oh, that was like the Vladimir Gutierrez 2 inning, seven run start blow up. That was one. They were dealing with Corbin Martin and his walk extravaganzas, lost a couple games. You had a Tyler Black 2-error game where they lost by a run and they had 3 unearned. So, um, at this level, a couple bounces go a different way, and you're having a different season. But the Sounds play in the International League. There is a proverbial heap of teams in both sides of the divisions here. So this is not like a 4-team division that we're dealing with Biloxi. So even though they finished 10 games over, they were never really threatening. I think the closest they got in the second half was like 5.5, 6 games of first.
Yeah.
And they had 9 teams in front of them. So it just gives you an example. So you have to be really good in the International League over a long period of months to make it into the postseason. And, I would say overarching sentiment would be a kudos to the Sounds for finishing 10 games over.
Yeah.
If you would have asked me without going back to, review my notes from what I watched, I would have guessed maybe a few games. I did not remember 10, but that's a testament to their second half. And also shout out Mitch White. He was pumping us shutout innings. And then, Chad Patrick giving great starts to close the year. But yeah, I think we should be very pleased with 10 games over. And I think Rick Sweet and his staff will be very pleased. I think they outperformed, honestly, expectations. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And the thing is that the strength of the Sounds was their bullpen. There's no doubt about it.
Yep.
And as the season wore on, much like in the Shuckers, when they were dealing with injuries and promotions, they were also dealing with the same. So you had Zastrizny was gone. You had Koenig no longer there. You had Herget getting called up. You had Paredes getting called up. And so they really got pilfered there. And they never really had the depth of the starters, especially with Carlos F. Rodriguez kind of having an up and down year. So they were really relying heavy because they were a top 2 bullpen team for much of the entire season. I believe Memphis, it was either Memphis or I think it may have been, or the Clippers. I can't remember off the top of my head. It doesn't really matter. They had a very good bullpen. That's the point there. But yeah, I'm extremely contented looking back at it. 10 games over, I think they exceeded expectations, and that's a testament to players and the staff. Like, it's a great job.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of them, but there were also MLB call-ups who stuck with the MLB club. Tobias Myers, obviously, being one of them. Robert Gasser.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
some major.
Yeah, it was pretty much every pitcher who performed for them ended up in MLB. So Jared Koenig, Aaron Ashby. Ashby obviously didn't help early on in that season, just coming off his injury and everything else, but the version they were getting out of the pen for a couple of weeks certainly would have helped him as well. But obviously he ended up helping the Brewers at the MLB level. And then really the one position player who ended up sticking was Eric Haas after he was eventually called up in whatever that was, June, probably, when there were some injury issues the Brewers were dealing with at catcher. But either way, it was a lot of roster turnover. And yeah, I mean, Rick Sweet is a minor league legend and Sounds legend, and he just does an incredible job. He's obviously got a great staff around him as well, and they just keep getting the job done one way or another. Like you said, it feels like for the most part they end up overperforming no matter what the talent level is, no matter what's coming in and out of the org or really just the team. And yeah, he does great work. He's getting old. He's still out there. It's funny to watch him get mad and go out and start talking to umpires. It takes him quite a while to get out there, but it's entertaining. He's an energetic guy for his age, and anytime we get a peek inside the clubhouse for like a call up or anything, it's always cool to see how he operates with the guys. You can tell the guys have a lot of respect for him and care about him, and seem to think he's quite good at his job. And I think anybody who's paid enough attention to them would definitely agree with that. And I think the record.
Well, I was going to say, of course, with his coaching staff, now we have Al LaBeouf.
Yep,
he's up with the Brewers as one of the 3 hitting coaches. So that's
a lead hitting coach even.
Yeah, very exciting for Rick and his staff to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I mean, that's really the overview of the season. There's not a ton we won't touch on as we go through our tiers here. So we're going to jump right into the position players. Like we mentioned, there's not that many left. So we've got 6 position players to talk about that are noteworthy. And really, this is pretty much everyone that is returning, if I recall. So starting off with probably the biggest name, I think the name everyone is most familiar with in Brewers world here, which is Tyler Black. We've talked about Black. Jack and I have talked about Black a lot on our show. We've talked about Black before. We've talked about his defense, everything else. So, first of all, offensively, he still had a very solid season. It's important to keep in mind what the hitting environment is in AAA. And so he ended up with an OPS of 803, which is really, really solid. The 114 WRC plus kind of points to what the hitting environment is in AAA. It's pretty hitter friendly. The Sounds play in a place that I would say probably favors lefties power a little bit more. It's a pretty short porch, especially down the line in Nashville. We've seen Sal Frelick poke some out there at times. We've seen Black use it, but Black also hit some homers that were not cheapies at all. I think the main thing with Black is just always going to be the defense, finding a spot for him. We've talked about that a number of times. I think we both agree that defense is, or outfield is probably the best place for him to be. It's just a matter of, does that fit with what the Brewers can do and what they need? And I don't know if that's going to ever be the case, but Tyler Black continues to perform in AAA and he continues to get the job done. I think this would probably have been considered, I don't want to say a disappointment, but probably not as high of a ceiling season as you might have hoped for from him offensively. He had some really, really good stretches mixed in there, but he did struggle at times as well. I think there was probably a little bit of the pressure of going to MLB and then being sent back down, and also the idea that he knows he's always a call away, and also just the fact that he was coming up and down a lot. Like that's always a little bit different for somebody who's never had to kind of ride the shuttle between Milwaukee and Nashville. But what did you see from Black that maybe we've talked about him quite a bit, so we don't have to go in
well,
too much
can you pull back his player card for a moment?
Yes.
Fascinating. Okay, yeah, because his pull percentage is not, his overarching hit capacity is all field, but it seems to me that his long balls are almost, I'd say 90 to 10 pull, but that doesn't.
It is.
It
absolutely
really
is. Yeah.
So anyhow, yeah, I think that his time with the Brewers overexpressed the disappointment of AAA. Like, he didn't have a bad season at AAA, but I think in terms of the trajectory of where we were thinking he was going to go, I think you could call it a disappointment. There was a stretch where he wasn't hitting the ball very hard. Defensively, the experiment from third base to first base, despite what anyone may tell you, it's just so inconsistent. It's not going to engender trust at the major league level. So I never even consider him a serious candidate anymore in terms of that. It's just like, there was a point in time where you and I both expressed like, hey, we could have a Ben Zobrist on our hands here. Well, that defense only got worse. And as I've said before, it's not to say he doesn't make plays. He does. However, those are interspersed with baffling errors or an incapacity to read his responsibilities on the infield dirt. So I have a broader perspective there personally, where I'm like, ooh, but on the outfield grass, he's actually really good. That's the thing. And I've opined before, and just guesstimating, seems to me that he has a longer ability to process the decision. It's still, you have to be quick, but he can sprint with his high end speed. He covers a ton of ground. I've seen him range hundreds of feet to grab balls in the gap, in the alley. Both at left field and in center field, catch it sure, catch it clean. I think that is his true best position, if we were to say that. Organizationally, I still, I don't know how Tyler Black is going to end up in the Brewers org. Like, in terms of how are they going to use him? Are they going to use him as somebody who adds outfield depth and replaces outfield depth, or are they going to use him to trade for something else? I don't know. Still an extremely talented offensive player. Had probably a middle of the road season by his level of talent, and defensive question marks they're massive. That's the problem. And so you can't really, if you already have a Reese Hoskins at first base who's already playing questionable defense, you're not going to back him up with a first-year player that's arguably even worse.
Yeah.
Despite his athleticism. So I just don't know how it works, especially if you have a Wes Clark and you have an Ernesto Martinez right there. And then what, if you move Jory Ortiz from third base to short, you're going to replace him with Tyler Black's defense? Ooh, I
No.
just don't see it happening. So,
yeah.
And maybe I'm wrong in that. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, he's going to be always one of the more divisive players. It's a little bit along the lines of Keston here. I think there are two sides, and everybody seems very set on he can do that, but we'll find out. Shout out Keston, by the way, signing with the Rockies in the minor league, with the minor league deal.
Or
that
has he? Like, also not on their roster as of right now.
He's also not on their roster. But oh man, I've said for the last 2 years, I think if it's going to work anywhere, that's where it's going to work. So
Keston Hira hitting in the PCL clearly has some type of mojo. When he was on the Bees last year, my goodness, he had a stretch there where I think every breath he hit a home run. It was insane.
Yeah, no, he is. He's the Barry Bonds of AAA. I don't know. Hopefully, I hope he figures it out. I would love for him to at least hit in Colorado. I don't think he'll find a defensive spot, but maybe they'll put him in the outfield and let him work that. That felt like maybe his best chance. So we will see. But they've got the DH as well, and the Rockies suck, so they have plenty of roster.
The Rockies are going to give you a chance no matter what.
Yep.
You know what I was just realizing in our returning players, for some reason we didn't put Jefferson Caro there. That's probably because he was injured the entire year.
Yeah.
But he would obviously be the pinnacle there.
Right. He's absolutely would be in the highest tier, above probably the rest of them.
Yep.
Just the fact that he didn't play, we were kind of reviewing the season, but yeah, let's quickly touch on him because I think we both are very high on him and we've talked about him before, but like Caro for me is still the potential, assuming the shoulder doesn't hamper him in terms of throwing when he comes back, the potential is still there for him to be an all-star level catcher, a guy who's a legitimate like top 5-ish catcher in baseball. There's power there. There's good bat to ball skills. He chases more than you'd want, but you're not finding a perfect hitter at the catcher spot who's as good defensively with a great arm.
Yeah.
If you do, you might have prime Buster Posey on your hands, which that doesn't come around very often. So Caro is a good hitter overall, I would say, with power in the bat. And I mean, the arm is unbelievable. That's going to be the thing that we need to keep an eye on next year for sure. And then he made huge strides the last couple of years for me in the receiving department. And he was good when he first got into pro ball. I thought he struggled with like velo. As he caught more velo, he got much better at it. And I think he's got a chance to be a special defender if the arm is to the level that it was pre-injury. Even if it's not, I think he can be a good one, but it definitely hampers the ceiling a little bit if the arm is down, because the arm is just, it's a cannon. He's put up 1.8 pop times in games and lower at times. Not many guys with that type of arm behind the dish. So it'll be interesting to see it. Obviously, him not being a pitcher is a good thing, but nobody throws the ball more than a catcher outside of the pitching position. So it's going to be very interesting to see when he returns. But yeah, any thoughts for you on Caro?
I mean, it was just such a bummer. I mean,
yeah,
I watched that game, and when it happened, I was, oh no, another one diving back to first base. Like, come on. Yeah, I mean, that's the big concern. We don't know how his shoulder's going to react, and that is like if we want to talk about unicorns, his arm is a unicorn at that position. And boy, that's a big who knows. We'll have to wait and see. I don't know how they're going to treat him as they integrate him back in, but man, he's a premium talent. My other concern there, and it relates to the shoulders, is he's had nagging injuries. He's young.
Yep.
He's absurdly athletic. He's an improving hitter. Has some power there as well. He has all the makeups you want in a guy of his stature. And now it's just a matter, can he stay healthy and can he get more games under his belt? And we'll just, prayer hands for that one, because man,
yeah,
such a talent.
Yeah, he is. He's very, very talented. And like I said, he would be in the tier for me, at least, above what we have on this board here as somebody that I think has more borderline star potential. So
totally one of one there.
Yeah. Next guy in this tier is Isaac Collins, somebody the Brewer fans did get to see a little bit of at the end of the season. Collins, well, speaking of the Rockies, he was drafted away from the Rockies in the minor league portion of the Rule 5 draft a couple seasons back. This is a guy who he just got the job done at pretty much every level through the minors. And he had a really good season last year in AAA. He earned his opportunity 100%. 24 steals, WRC plus was 125. His 90th percentile exit velo of 103.8 is reasonably high for a guy who's only 5'8", and switch hits nonetheless. There's some punch in that bat, and I think he might be getting overlooked a bit in terms of what he could add to this year's roster. We'll talk about the next two guys that are on the 40-man in a few minutes here. But for me, this is the guy in this group that's on the 40-man that I genuinely think could help the Brewers to a decently large extent next season. Collins plays all over the place. I think outfield is probably the better place, but I think he can hold his own on the infield. He's somebody who, if they need to put him on the infield, I'd feel fine with it. Not short necessarily, but he did that a little bit in the minors, and he could hold up. I don't know that I'd want him there in MLB when you have guys like Terang and Ortiz at your disposal that you could use and everything else. But second, maybe even third, I think he can handle those. So this is a guy that I think he made the playoff roster for a reason. And it was pinch running, but it was also, I think, the fact that they believed he could hold his own if he had to come in and do something in a game where they needed him. So I like Isaac Collins a lot. I think we both talked about him a little bit after his AA season, and we were like, yeah, there's stuff here. Like, it's not just, oh, he did well on the surface. Like, there's legitimate ability here. And then I think he added a little bit of juice this offseason, or at least started tapping into it a little bit more. And I like him. He's one of the more under the radar guys for me in the organization as a whole. A guy who I think absolutely deserves to be on the 40-man and to keep that spot. And yeah, I think there's a decent chance he's going to help the Brewers again this year. So what did you see from Collins this year?
Yeah, I think it's no secret. He's been one of my favorite players that nobody talks about for the last 2 seasons.
Yeah.
I've watched him all in Biloxi, and then he was better in Nashville. Switch hitter, hits both sides of the plate, hits it well. From both sides. I mean, that's not to be lost in this conversation. So he's applicable as a reserve for the Brewers, corner outfield more than likely. But I personally think his best position is second base. Is he a Bryce Terang? Heck no, nobody is. But his arm is, he's not. I think he only had like 1 or 2 outfield assists, given the outfield innings, and they were surprising to me when they happened. When I watched him, I was like, oh. But he's very competent in that this is a guy who not only drives the ball, drives it consistently, and he'll hit for average. He doesn't chase really. He's a professional hitter, but he's just super consistent in everything he does. And so not only is he an ascending player, and he's young enough, but he's professional. And he speaks to that in his interviews. And I think that can't be overvalued enough. When you're talking about an end of the bench guy, which he'll be because of his limitations and his lack of pedigree, but in terms of being able to come in and give you professional innings in a capacity that maybe he even gives you a gapper, maybe even gets a long ball, but he's not going to make mental errors. That's a guy I want on the team. And yeah, to your point, I agree. He's out of all the guys, out of Mona, out of Brewer Hicklin, out of a Vinny Capra, Isaac Collins, to me, is the cream of that utility crop. And it's not really all that close for me. Brewer Hicklin has more power, but Brewer Hicklin has struggled in every MLB exposure he's had, whether it's base running errors or whether it's striking out, which has been prevalent at every level. Isaac Collins isn't that guy. He's just a better overall baseball player. It's just the way it is. And if I have a Tyler Black in my toolkit potentially to cover those outfield innings, I probably lean that direction anyway, just me personally speaking. But I don't want to like parse that out per se, but I'm a huge fan of Collins. I think he can succeed at the MLB level. And if he's already gotten better and he's continued to get better, What's to say he can't even become an everyday player, say 2-3 years down the line? I don't know. I'm not going to put that limit on him. And he's another guy, speaking to the mentals, he's just with it.
Yeah.
Every interview he's had, you can just see he's dialed in. He's focused on who he is. He knows who he is as a player, and he just works on those parts of his craft and gets better at it. That's a guy I want in the roster. So I'm happy he's there.
Yep. 100% agree. You mentioned Brewer Hicklin. He is the next one on this list in this tier. As you mentioned, more power than Collins. Pretty high exit velocities he posted. He pulled the ball in the air quite a bit in the minors. 44 steals in the minors. Very impressive season on the surface. As you mentioned, even in AAA, there was almost a 28% K rate, which gets a little high when you're in the minors still. He's had the swing and miss issues. The whiff rate was 34.6%, which is really high in the minors. It's a guy who you really want to succeed. He seems like a great guy, a great teammate. He plays really hard. He has the power. He has the speed. He's a pretty good defender. He's got a pretty good arm in the outfield. But it's to the point where, like you said, there's base running mistakes, which show up in the minors too. This was not just a major league issue. Like, he stole a lot of bases, but I wouldn't say the overall base running was ever great in AAA. There were plenty of mental mistakes made on the bases down there as well. And then we saw it a couple times in MLB in a pretty small sample already. Yeah. He's a tough one. It just feels like almost like a Keston situation where he's too good for AAA, but he might not be good enough for MLB. And he made it to the majors with Kansas City. He made it up last year, but it's getting to the point where at 28, he'll be 29 by the time the season starts. He's probably running out of opportunity. I feel bad for him. He, like I said, it seems like a great dude. Seems like a guy who does a lot of really good things on the baseball field. But I mentioned when we talked about big time stats to look at, and whiff rate is always going to be a big one for me. If you're over 30 in the minors, it just almost never works out in the major leagues. And he's been there for pretty much his entire career in the minors, so it's not a new thing. I hope it works out. I hope he ends up being somebody who can help the Brewers, but I think personally that he's probably one of the guys who's somewhat up next on the chopping block when they need a 40-man spot. I would imagine he's kind of towards the top of that list right now. But what were your thoughts on Hicklin this year, watching him in the minors, and then maybe do you think he could help in the major leagues at some point?
Yeah, I mean, he could get hot. You never know.
Yeah.
Has that power bat, has decent, that 105.5. That's, that's like what, 84th percentile. It's not, not bad.
Yeah.
The swing and the miss, the whiff rate, that's very concerning. I mean, I loved watching him as a Sound. I mean, he was one of the only Sounds who was hitting for a while, and I think he deserved the call up. But this is. I think it's fair to say this is his make or break professional season right here, 2025. This is it. This is his second opportunity, major league level. He's got competition. He's going to have to rise to the occasion, or he's going to have some alternate career path happening in baseball. I don't know what it will be, but hey, this is what you sign up for as a professional player. These are the challenges that you're faced with when you're an end of the roster guy, and we can only hope that he meets the challenge, right? In the best of his abilities. I have my doubts. I think that's natural, but who doesn't, right? And so it's going to be up to him. Yeah. And he's still on the roster. He's made it through several maneuvers, which has been he clearly has standing. And we'll just have to see where he starts the year and how it goes. If he starts, let's just put it this way: if he starts with the Brewers and stays on the roster, it is going to be absolutely crucial for him to start off well.
Yes.
Crucial.
Yeah.
You can't have
100%.
those base running gas, challenging arms he shouldn't challenge, and tag up situations.
Yeah.
He's got to know his opponents. He's going to have to be more disciplined. So if he can do that, I mean, that's a bonus. Let's take and run with it. But yeah, it's big year for him.
Indeed. Another guy who the whiff rate is even more concerning for this one. Wes Clark, former 10th round pick out of South Carolina, guy who has massive power. The 90th percentile exit velocity of 104.8 is 82nd percentile, but we've seen max EVs even in AA up to 113. 114, I believe, even on a homer. He's got huge power in the bat, but that 39% whiff rate is crazy high. That's 4th percentile in minor league baseball. The strikeout rate's almost 34%, even higher than Hicklin. Like I mentioned, when it's that high in the minors, it's rarely going to work out in the major leagues. Clark hits the ball and pulls the ball in the air at a very high level. His pulled fly ball rate is actually one of the better in AAA last year. So when he pulls the ball, he hits it in the air, which is a good thing. That's what you want for a guy who hits for power. It's just everything else that is worrisome with him. Like we mentioned earlier, he holds his own at first base. He's not a catcher. I know they tried the catching thing. He's not a catcher. He could be your emergency catcher on your roster and be better than probably most emergency catchers would be, but I do not view him as a catcher. But he's got good hands due to the catching background, I would imagine. I think I look at him maybe a little bit, yeah, not as a catcher, but the hands are okay, especially like picking stuff. I look at him maybe a little bit more rowdy where you're not getting much range, but he'll probably pick the ball decently. For me, this is a tough one. The power is crazy. It's genuinely like upper tier major league power. And we got a question from Daniel. He asked, we have Wes Clark's minor league rights for 3 more seasons, and he had one of the highest expected weighted on base averages on our AAA roster last year, yet he feels somewhat forgotten. Any thoughts? Can his defense improve now that he's a full-time first baseman? Can he blast 30 homers in MLB someday? I touched on defense a little bit. I do think focusing on first will help with that because the hands have to be decent to catch. They weren't very good as catcher, but I think they'll be okay at first. I think he's capable power-wise of hitting 30 homers in MLB someday. I don't know that he would ever get the opportunity to even get that many at-bats because I just think the strikeouts and the whiffs are going to completely limit his ability to stick at the major league level. Maybe on a White Sox type team, like where he's just given free reign to go out and hit every day. If he can cut down on him a little bit, maybe then I could see that happening. It's hard for me to envision it with the Brewers and how things are lined up. At one point, I thought his ceiling was maybe like a Rhys Hoskins type of player. Rhys never struck out or swung and missed this much, and I just don't think he's going to be able to cut down on it enough to even get to that point. But he's a very fun AAA player. He'll help your AAA team for sure. He'll help your minor league team. Again, almost along the lines of Hicklin, it feels like a guy who's maybe going to end up looking too good for AAA in a year or two, but maybe not good enough for MLB overall. But Joseph, what are your thoughts, and include anything that Daniel asked as well?
Yeah, I think one thing we haven't talked about with Wes that I really appreciate is he's another guy who's uber positive.
Yep.
The overwhelming opinions in the clubhouses he's been in the Brewers org have been he's just a positive force. Brendan Del Chiaro talked about him last offseason in the same breath as Ethan Murray. The organization likes him quite a bit. They think he's he could have been a pro that day, although I thought that was a stretch. Yeah, with Wes, I don't think he's a forgotten guy by any measure. Maybe in the fact that they drafted Blake Burke and then Ernesto's getting a lot of the press, but he was promoted first, had a torrid start at Double-A. But yeah, to your point there, with Wes he's going to give you competent first base defense. It's not going to be great, but he's not going to hurt you. He has good hands for that position. He doesn't have the flexibility there, obviously, or the agility or the stretch or what Ernesto brings. And then you couple in that whiff rate is concerning. Massive power. He can access that power, but it's a little bit like, Brock Wilken in a way where you're like, he has to get beyond the 2 true outcomes. If he can access that power, well, he's absolutely has to lower that whiff rate. There's no questions there. That does not play. It just doesn't. Especially he's going to be facing way better pitching. It's just you can only see that getting worse if that's where it's starting from. So for him to be realistically in the conversation from my vantage point, he has to cut that down to at minimum 30%. And that's a big ask when you're talking cut down 10%. But to me, it's about how he handles pitches. When I watch him whiff, because as everyone knows, I watch all these games, he misses a lot of pitches in the zone. And that's what
Yep.
concerns me. He's missing him high center. And I don't know if it's an eye timing issue. I don't necessarily know what it is, but that has to be fixed to really be considered a guy who's going to come in and make a difference. We have that team control. Can he do it? I think a guy with his attitude and his work ethic might be able to actually do that. The historicity is not on his side because it's something that's followed him. So there's legit concerns there, but super likable player regardless. And
Mhm.
I know that Org loves him, and I really hope he can tap into that. I have doubts, and I think those doubts are based in evidence. So we'll just have to see
Yeah.
where it plays.
Yep. Agreed. I looked it up. His in zone whiff rate is 35.4%, which was first percentile in AAA. So it's a
So
big,
don't lie.
big
I
problem.
watched the game. I didn't even have the number.
Yeah.
I just watched the game.
Yeah. No, I mean it's just to illustrate how bad it is. It's the worst basically in AAA. So that's a problem. That
And
makes
that's
it
what I'm
really
talking
hard.
about. Where I would like have watching that bat, and I'll be like, "Boy, Wes, that was a very hittable pitch, and he missed it by
Yeah.
like 6 inches." And so I was like,
Yeah.
"Huh."
Yeah, that
So I
that
don't know
always
what's going
makes
on.
you wonder if there's like a predetermined swing path, those types of things. I always thought Kirk Neuenhuis had that when I would watch him, that he would just
Hmm.
swing in the same spot, and if it was there, it was going to go really far, but it wasn't often there. So, yeah, Clark is like one of those guys who, if he hit the ceiling offensively, like I said, a Reese Hoskins type outcome was within range. It's just you got to see a lot lower whiffs, and that's hard to fix this late into his career at this point. So we will see. The last one in this tier is Vinny Capra, another 40-man guy, probably another guy who I would think is somewhat on the chopping block for when they do need a spot. I think what Capra has that a lot of these guys don't have is that I think he actually does play pretty good defense in the infield, comparatively to the other options. The Brewers were comfortable enough putting him at short for a couple innings last year when he came up, and they needed to take Willie out. They actually ended up putting Capra there for a few innings. I think they view him as a guy that they see as shortstop depth if they need to go down and get somebody and bring him up, rather than moving a Terang around, rather than doing all of those things. Just somebody who could slot in there, somebody who could play any of the positions defensively. He doesn't strike out much. There's not a lot of whiff there, but he was a below average hitter in AAA. It's for me, this is a guy that they just view as a safe option, I think, in the minor leagues, as somebody that they could bring up and he probably won't kill you. But I still think at the same time he's probably a little bit on like I said, the chopping block for the next 40-man spot whenever they need it. I mentioned to you in text the other day, but I think they've basically run out of pitchers that they would feel comfortable DFAing. I think Bukauskas might have been the very last one that they had any. I'm guessing they didn't want to with Bukauskas. They held him all season while he was hurt. All of these different things. I think they were getting to a point where they're like, all right, we have too many pitchers, but we also don't want to get rid of any of them. I think they're going to have to start digging into the position side of things a little bit more. So I would guess the next few moves might end up with some position guys being DFA'd. But first, before I let you give your thoughts quick on Capra, I mean, it's a great story that this guy even made the majors at any point. 20th round pick, signed for $1,000 out of college. It's kind of the Nate Orff type deal where he was basically just, I mean, as much of a lotto ticket as you can take on a guy who was already a little bit older too. So the fact that he's built himself into a guy who's played in the majors multiple times for multiple teams is really cool. He seems like another good guy, another guy who just does what he's asked to do and does it to the best of his ability. But unfortunately, the ability itself is probably not super high. He's just maxing what he's capable of doing, which is great for him. But in terms of Brewers' future, I think that makes it hard to see anything beyond, like I said, maybe the safe call up, somebody they know they can bring up and send back down if needed or whatever. But Capra did some good things in Nashville, especially on the defensive end, especially just being available very regularly all season. He was one of the few guys, most of these guys we talked about, but really it was mostly these five guys who were there almost the entire season, other than their short stints in MLB for some of the other ones. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on Capra overall?
Well, if Tyler J was that deep lefty insurance, I think Vinny Capra, if you consider the last several years of Sounds, there is a place within the Brewers for a guy like an Eddie Alvarez, for a guy like a Pablo Reyes. The
Mhm.
Brewers pride themselves on having those savvy veterans who they know won't hurt you. So with Capra, he got better. Honestly, he closed his season. It was kind of like Chris Roller really had a
Yeah.
torrid way to end his year before he chose free agency. Capra got he started hitting better as the season wore on. He's not a power guy. He's his exit velo tells you that. But he's a solid veteran. Does he warrant a mandated 40-man spot? I don't think so. But here's another guy who's made it all this way. So he clearly has some capacity, some value. I see Capra as insurance to Durbin and Oliver Dunn. That's what I see him
Mhm.
as in terms of those guys are unknown, also smaller guys. You don't know how they're going to perform. Well, with Capra, you know that he's going to give you innings and he's not going to hurt you defensively.
Yep.
So that's at least there. Where it all ends up by the time spring training is over or starts even, I don't know. I was surprised on multiple occasions last year when, Vinny's on the 40-man. Oh, okay. But
Mhm.
yeah, the Brewers clearly value him. He's a solid veteran. Is there more upside there? I doubt it. And I think the Brewers think that's okay.
Yeah.
So will he
Mhm.
have staying power? That's my only question.
Yeah. Agreed. Last one here, and this one we'll put more in the others of note. Freddie Zamora. This is a guy who was a second
Right.
round pick in the COVID draft. It has it hasn't gone great for him. Obviously, he had shown some things. He had a pretty decent 2023. It was not a great season. A 64 WRC plus. His 90th percentile exit velo was under 100. He really didn't perform super well in any regard offensively, which is always tough. There was just nothing that really stands out as a major positive for him. He's always been a solid defender, though he will have mental lapses and he'll make some errors along the way as well. I think he's cleaned that up a little bit as he's moved along in the system. It was really bad early in his career, but it just hasn't really all come together for him. We got a question from Beater GB asking what to make of Freddie Zamora. He mentioned he had a promotion that may not have been earned, but he did okay when he was there. I think, unfortunately, I would consider Zamora pretty much organizational depth at this point. Somebody who can play shortstop, who can move around, who maybe will go between a few different levels over the course of a season. There's still talent there, so I don't want to completely rule out that he might figure it out, but 2024 was rough. He's had a lot of injuries throughout his minor league career as well. It just feels like one of those guys that it just might not work out with overall. But what are your thoughts, Joseph?
Yeah, there's hard to add much more there. The defense has gotten better, as you were speaking to it early. He also dealt with a pretty significant injury in Biloxi that he overcame. Started the year pretty well in Biloxi. The call up, they needed a guy, I guess. Yeah, you watch Freddie, he's got such a graceful, athletic body. It's a little bit confounding that he hasn't done more. And I imagine the Brewers probably feel the same way. I don't know that's the case. But yeah, he's a guy who consistently leaves you wondering why he isn't producing more. Given that he's got decent size, he's got good athleticism, he moves very, very agilely, and but the proof's in the pudding. I mean, he does not really produce, and he was given ample opportunities in Nashville, the day in day out shortstop, and he was the number 9 hitter, no pressure. I mean, other than the pressure that's inherently there, obviously, but he just didn't really do much. And so, I mean, it's hard to be bullish on a Freddie Zamora, at this point in his career. But again, he has that talented physical specimen type of body, and second round pick, has the caliber of track record there in terms of he was a prospect at one point. That's a guy that usually gets more than one opportunity, even if it isn't with the Brewers down the line. But the light bulb has yet to turn on within the Brewers for any prolonged period of time.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So that will wrap up the position player side of things. We'll jump into the pitchers here. On the pitching side, we mostly, these are a little bit different. Like Jacob Mizorowski is listed as a reliever. I think we both think there's a pretty good chance that's how it ends up, but we probably wouldn't rule him out totally of starting. I listed him this way because this is what they did for the Sounds. So Mizorowski was almost exclusively out of the pen. He made a couple starts, but they were mostly 1 to 2 inning starts just to get him used to the shorter outings. So Mizorowski is listed there. We'll go through him. We've talked about a bunch of these guys already, so we're not going to go in depth on the ones we have, but we have some new names that we have to get to, of course, and that I think starts us off with the guy who was the best pitcher in the league this season, Chad Patrick, added to the 40-man this offseason. He was the International League Pitcher of the Year. Just fantastic season from him. I mean, he was absolutely incredible. He won the Triple Crown in the International League. As I mentioned, AAA is a hitter's paradise currently. So to post a 2.9 ERA, very impressive. The strikeout rates were in a pretty good spot. The walk rates were in a good spot. I think the one thing you would probably notice is that he did give up some homers, but that happens in AAA, especially more often than at lower levels. So he did a bunch of really good things. Patrick is a guy who the Brewers got for, why can't I think of his first name? Abraham Toro from the A's this past offseason. And I mean, he kept getting the job done, and really, really good season. He earned his spot on the 40-man. I think he's a guy that we both think could at least help in some regard at the major league level next year, potentially even as a starter. But Joseph, what are your thoughts on Patrick as a whole?
Yeah, well, it's no secret. Chad Patrick is definitely another one of those guys that I felt like I was at the front and center of, like, why is he not getting more dues? And the conversation during the season, I mean, I know even some point, like, people were espousing the fact that they were surprised he was added to the 40-man because of some, whatever discourses within the organization. I can guarantee that's happening with most players anyhow. So I felt like it was an irrelevant point. I watched pretty much every one of his starts. And if you remember, I was one of the I think I was essentially the first guy that was highlighting, hey, look, Tobias Myers has reached another level out of the bullpen at Nashville. I'm watching it happen in real time. We need to be talking about him as a potential candidate next year for the Brewers. At that time, I thought it would be a bullpen role change. Little did I know he was going to take that growth and turn into the starter he turned into, which was exciting in and of itself. Chad Patrick's a similar story. I watched him every start, essentially. I think I maybe missed 2 in the early part of the year. Didn't have like the greatest start, as that often happens. You're only pitching 3 innings to start a year. You're getting your innings up, etc. But then, he had, I think he had 3 games by the end of May where he had 21 whiffs or more, which was absurd to me. It led all the international leagues. So that's when he really started coming on the radar. By the end of the year, and I think we have some maps up here. Yeah, he's throwing you the 4-seamer, a sinker, essentially 2-seamer, and a very good cutter, elite, I would say. And then he's got a changeup slider in there. What he can do, he can mix up a game where his changeup is suddenly the secondary pitch. He'll do that randomly to teams. And so this is a guy who knows what he's doing. He's just a professional pitcher. By the end of the year, I mean, people have to realize he had a 9K outing and an 8K outing, I believe, against Norfolk that has Kobe Mayo. It had Westerberg. It had Ramon Urias. It had MLB hitters in it. I watched him have 19 whiffs, 21 whiffs. Norfolk is no joke. He did the same to Memphis. He had a 12K outing in September. He got better in the latest part of the year, throwing his most pitches. There was a period there in late August, early September. He's sitting 93.5 as an average, but touching 94.8, almost 95. So this context, to me, he was a shoo-in for the 40-man. I didn't care to the fact that he wasn't added during the season. I get they play a roster game. Maybe they're trying to save some aspect of his call-up, whatever. I don't even care. to me was a shoo-in because it was the same thing they saw with Tobias Myers, and then Tobias Myers reached another level with the Brewers. So to me, this is a guy I'd say by the middle of the season could very easily be your number 4, number 5 guy if the chips fall where they may. If he then is working this offseason and say now he's touching 95, 95.5, we're talking about a whole different ball game here. So, you know, he's gonna sit in a given game as it currently stands. He'll sit anywhere from like 83 miles per hour to 94.8 on a given day. So he can give you that, 15 miles per hour difference there. He knows how to play the zone. His cutter is an elite pitch. He gets a lot of whiffs on that cutter. This is just a guy that I think people should be more excited about, and they just frankly aren't. And I don't understand it. So that's where I'll leave it. He was one of the, for me, the conversation at the end of the season wasn't about the 40 man. It was more to me like, did he get consideration as organizational pitcher of the year over Casey Hunt? Those are the conversations I wanted to know about. Was there discourse there? Because to me, him not even mentioning that conversation as people were celebrating Craig Yoho and Casey Hunt, rightfully so, it should have added, we should have had an asterisk for a guy who had a historical season that had only been accomplished 3 times in the history of the International League. So to me, those things stand out. And that is a very hitter-friendly league, not as hitter-friendly as the PCL, but just a really solid guy. And I'm super excited to see how he takes the opportunity in spring training. What are we going to see? What version of him? Is it going to be the August version?
Yeah.
If he hits the ground running like August, late August, September, Chad Patrick, don't say I didn't warn you. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the ability to change shape on the cutter is also pretty impressive. I think there was question whether it was on purpose or not when you start looking at it, but it seems to be just going back and kind of looking at how he messes with it on different sides of the plate to different hitters and stuff. It definitely seems to be. So
yeah, I think it is because can I just say something real quick?
Yeah.
Having watched him the number of times I did, he attacks lineups differently. Like I said, one game he'll throw 30 or 25, 30 changeups. Next game he'll throw 4. So he has this plan. One game his cutter will have less cut. Next game it'll have more. Like he'll sit on like maybe like a 12, 13 inch, and then he'll go up 17 inch. Like he'll just do that. And if you track his heat maps, he does it through each month, which is fascinating. So I think he's just one of those savvy guys who's tweaking who he is as a pitcher, knows he has the tools, and now it's like, oh man, where is he going to take that floor? That's why I'm just so intrigued by him. Okay, sorry, handing it back to you.
No, you're good. You are good. Next one, we've got Logan Henderson. We have talked about Henderson a lot. He made a few starts in AAA to end his season. Somebody who was in only low A in 2023 made his way all the way up to AAA. Also added to the 40 man. I don't think any surprise on that one either. Big time strikeout numbers over the course of the season, very limited walk rate. I think the homers are again going to be the concern with him. The way he pitches, it's a very, very low ground ball rate. It's a high fly ball rate. So it's a very flat isn't the right word, but it's a ride heavy fastball. It carries through the zone. If you leave it in the wrong spots, that is a pitch that can get hit for some power. And it's not super surprising. Guys who are like him do end up having some issues with homers most of the time. The good news is when you don't walk anybody, that lessens the impact of homers and stuff across the board. But high whiff rate, high strikeout rate, did a lot of really good things. We got to see him in AAA. I think there is going to be the concern in MLB about him basically being a 2-pitch pitcher. We will see. It's going to be, I think at some point we will see him in MLB this season as long as he's healthy. I think when you're on the 40 man, there's a pretty good chance you're going to end up pitching for the Brewers at some point in the season. But the changeup's are really, really good. I think we got to hope he can find a cutter, slider, something to work with. If he doesn't find anything that he can at least throw more often, I don't see it's going to be hard to start. If he can throw something even as just a show me breaking ball or cutter, like I said, you can see like a Marco Estrada type career for him potentially. Guy who he was kind of cutting edge on the riding fastball changeup combo. That's kind of who I look at when I see him, but he did end up having a breaking ball that was pretty decent throughout the course of his career. That's going to be the difference for Henderson. We've talked about it a lot, but any other thoughts on Logan Henderson?
If I'm not mistaken, when Logan first got to Carolina, did he not have a slider he was playing with?
He did, and he was trying to throw it this year at times too.
Yeah, but it didn't just like toss it. Yeah, that. So for me, going back, so when the 40-man announcements were happening for Rule 5 protection, for me, just so people understand how my tiers work or my thinking worked at the time, my question had nothing to do with Chad Patrick. My question had everything to do with Logan and Shane Smith. I could not parse out at the current time how and why I liked either one more than the other. So I had them both on the roster. And this is why I was so surprised that Shane Smith wasn't added, because why would we not protect them both? Logan is a 2-pitch guy at present, so we have to find the third pitch. And in that 2-pitch mix, having watched him at Nashville, this goes in again. Watch Chad Patrick's pitch Norfolk. Watch Chad Patrick pitch Norfolk. Try to say that 10 times fast. Then watch Logan Henderson pitch Norfolk's lineup. It's night and day different. Logan got popped. A lot of hard hits. And that's because he's relying on that ride-heavy fastball and the changeup, which is a very plus pitch. But if he's not on in that day in terms of pinpoint accuracy with where he's riding that, talented hitters are going to crush that ball because it's going too much to the meat of the plate. And that's what was happening. So at AAA, what he learned, I think, more than anything, was that he has to be absolutely pinpoint accurate with his current 2 offerings. Otherwise, he is a reliever, and that's fine. But to Shane Smith point there, I saw Shane Smith as a burgeoning starter, and I'm sure the White Sox did as well. That's why they teach him, or they took him at the first pick. He's already got a slider. He's got a breaking ball. He's got a heater. Sitting 90, 94, 95. Okay. So I didn't quite understand that. Still don't understand it, and that's okay. But Logan, yeah, to your point, absolutely agreed on that. Has to find some type of thing to sprinkle in there, or otherwise they're just going to sit on his heater. Why would you not? So it was a big season. Big season. I'm stoked to see him. I've loved him since the first time I saw him on the mound. I love his presence. I love his competitive nature. Love his build. Major lower body there. None of his size concerns me. Got to see a little more happening to get really excited.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. A name Brewer fans got to see at the major league level this year, Carlos Rodriguez, righty. Obviously, again, we got a glimpse of him in the MLB, so we won't go through too much here, but really, really rough start. He had a very good second month of the season, and that's what led to him being called up to MLB. It took him a little bit of time to... He was good through the first time through the order in MLB, and then it just started getting hit, and that's not super shocking. The tough part with Rodriguez for me is that he has a bunch of pitches. None of them really stand out. They're all fine. There are better pitches than others. I think the changeup, when it's on, can be really good. Both breaking balls have their moments. The cutter's not a bad pitch. The four seam's not a bad pitch, but the lack of command of any of them consistently really hurts him. And it doesn't allow them to really play up to any of their potential, which is tough. So it wasn't a great season overall. Obviously, you can see the 4.5 ERA, the 4.68 FIP. Strikeouts were down from where they had been at lower levels. Whiff rate was down from where it had been at lower levels. And he even had some pretty good BABIP luck on his side for somebody who doesn't get many grounders, or he's a decent fly ball guy, I guess, but a 253 BABIP is actually pretty low for somebody who had the ball in play as much as he did. So it's going to be an important year for him as well this next season. I think there's stuff here. I think he can make it work, but the command is really going to need to take a step forward for me. I think more than anything, it's just you have to be able to be more consistent game to game, pitch to pitch with all of your offerings, or maybe you need to shorten up the amount of pitches you throw a little bit and maybe focus more on a few that you can command a little bit better. And it worries me a little bit that maybe he's got too many things that he's worried about on the mound. I've run into that with some of my pitchers before. It's a thing. Like you can't perfect everything if you're always working on 6 different pitches all the time. So what were your thoughts on Rodriguez? What do you kind of see as his future, especially just this next season?
I mean, there's not much more to add there. I think you're spot on. With the way his setup is, he has to get more consistent pitch to pitch. And that's it, frankly. He's got good enough stuff. Whereas if he was pitching with as much repeatability and accuracy as, say, 2024 Manuel Rodriguez had at low A, you're talking about a whole different season. But as is, it wasn't a very good season as a whole. And it was largely due to the fact that he couldn't build on that Nicaragua appearance, or set of appearances, I should say. It kind of was a step back. And so if he can repeat and master the art of tickling the zone and placing his pitches, he's going to be just fine, because he has enough in the arsenal to be a, say at I think high end here, you're looking at a tolerable number 3. That would be like the elite version of him, if we're going to, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a big question mark, because it wasn't very zonally accurate, and it was in AAA as well as the major league level. It just wasn't. It just struggled all season with repeatability, and so that's just the big question mark. And so we'll have to see where it goes.
Yes, absolutely. Next on our list, we're going to get into some guys who made some bullpen appearances, some starting appearances, just kind of that piggyback role. They didn't really piggyback starters in Nashville, but that type of role. Evan McKendry is the first one. He was acquired from the Tampa Bay Rays at the deadline a couple seasons ago for Alex Jackson. Guy who does some good things on the mound. I think for me, when I watch him, I just, there's not much swing and miss to the stuff, and that always is tough to make work, especially when it's a heavy fly ball kind of profile as well. He gave up quite a few homers. The velo's not very big. He pitched better when he moved into a pen role for a at least like a month or so stretch. He was seeing some better results. But it's just tough. I don't see any pitches that stand out for him. A guy who's fine in AAA for the most part, but again, like a lot of these guys we've talked about, I just don't know that he ever could really stick at the major league level. But somebody who was worth a look from the Brewers' perspective for sure. I just don't know that there's ever going to be the type of stuff that can carry himself into a major league role. So next on the list, we have Tyler Waisner, who we talked about last time. We're not going to dive into it too much. He struggled mightily in Nashville after a great start in Biloxi. He actually had an okay first appearance, showing some video for those on YouTube right now. He throws a bunch of pitches. It's kind of like Carlos Rodriguez, where they're all okay. They're all decent. But he just really didn't. He did not command the ball well enough at AAA, especially. That carried over back when he went back to AA after his struggles in Nashville. Waisner is still a lot younger than a guy like McKendry. Well, not that much younger, I guess, only a year or two. And yeah, it was tough to watch him struggle that badly at AAA. He was a guy that I was pretty excited about, especially after his start in AA, and it just did not come together. And then, like I said, it kind of carried over back to AA when he returned. So tough season for Waisner. There's still something there, but it's not. I don't think you can dream on anything better than maybe Colin Ray, and that's fine. That would be a great pitcher. That'd be a great outcome for him. That's kind of the guy he reminds me of when I watch him, but Colin Ray did not walk 6 per 9. He did not have that many issues with those types of things in the minors. Waisner is going to have to, it's going to be a really big prove it year for him. Like we said with a lot of these guys, it's when you're in the upper minors and you struggle, if you don't get cut that year, you're usually on a 1 year, like, hey, this is big time, prove it to me right now mode. And he's going to be one of them next year. But Joseph, any thoughts on Waisner there?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who's got an intriguing mix in terms of what he has to in offerings. And my main question mark with Tyler Waisner for the last 2 years has been why he has such variance in his velocity. It's a nut I haven't been able to crack in terms of fully come and understand it. Like, he'll come out in spring training with, I guess you're coming out, amped up, but those are not the numbers you see by the mid to end of the season where you're like, you're excited to be low 90s there. So yeah, just, it was kind of a throwaway season. Unfortunately, he had flashes even after that great start in Biloxi. He started off well in Nashville, but then just absolutely it was a lost season after that. Which is super unfortunate.
Yeah.
Just could never really get it together. Was getting peppered. Was walking guys as well. At that point, you just wonder if he just needs a break, get a mental reset. So yeah, to your point though, yeah,
Mhm.
huge off season, huge season. This is a make or breaker.
Yep. 100% agree. Another guy in this tier is Garrett Stallings. The Brewers traded for him last season for Thiago Vieira and Anuris Rodriguez from the Orioles. He showed some pretty decent things with the Brewers at times, especially it was not the overall ERA looks fine at 4.27. It's not great. He pitched better once he was back into more of a relief role. He had some really good outings in that role. I think there might be more swing and miss in his stuff than he has shown. Like the whiff rate actually it's okay. It's 28%. Comparatively, the strikeout rate does not line up with that at all at 19%. So I think he might have an ability to get more strikeouts than he showed with the Brewers so far. So that makes him a little bit interesting to me. He's another guy, kitchen sink. It's a little bit of a funkier delivery, which can make it tough on hitters. But what did you see from Garrett Stallings?
Yeah, my question, and I had this in my postseason sound notes. If you look at his last two seasons, he's ended both seasons really well. However, significant portions of his seasons have been really pedestrian. So is this an anomaly?
Yeah.
Is it a pattern? I don't know. He's a sinker baller that absolutely has to have his sinker baller cutting below the zone. Otherwise, he doesn't throw with enough velo to be dangerous with it. So he was very good out of the bullpen the last 2 months. Is he going to start in the bullpen? Does the sound staff welcome that? Is that what the plan is? I don't know. I would say that, back to Evan McKendry, like if you put, and I know there was a question about McKendry, Stallings, and McGee. All three of those guys are just, they're question mark guys for me, where Easton, at least with Easton McGee, he was coming off of a Tommy John. So we can at least say we don't really know what we have there yet.
Yep.
But Easton McGee was invited to spring training, whereas Evan and Stallings aren't, at least publicly, yet.
Right.
So, yeah, if he starts out of the pen and he starts like he did last year, well, okay, there's a guy here that could help out at the major league level. That's a big if, though. So we'll see.
Yeah. Speaking of Easton McGee, like you said, there was only 33 innings this year. He was coming off surgery. All of those innings were not thrown in AAA. They were also thrown in the Arizona Complex League, some of them. He showed, again, he's always had, since prior to being signed by the Brewers, he has had fantastic command. He does not walk many at all, 1.08 walks per 9. The whiff rate was really low, not what you'd be hoping for, although sometimes that can get skewed because in this, they are factoring some of the complex league data in, and that messes it up sometimes when guys have because they don't have the whiff data for the complex league because they don't go pitch by pitch on the play-by-play. So that can screw it up a little bit. It was a little bit better in AAA than that, but it was still pretty low. His big thing is that he is consistently in the zone, and for the most part in his career, even, he's done a pretty good job limiting homers. He gets the ball on the ground a decent amount. There's not a ton of velo, but it's a guy who you can see like a swingman role potentially if everything goes right for him. Somebody who can, maybe a Bryce Wilson type. It's not the same type of repertoire, but just like the type of way he would be used if he made it to MLB. Like Joseph mentioned, he did get a non-roster invite to spring training, which means the organization either one promised him that when they signed him as a 2-year minor league free agent, that's on the table, but two, there's a decent chance they like some of the stuff they see and they want to see what they can do with maybe a little bit more hands-on in spring training, getting to work with him, especially with the major league staff potentially. We will see. It'll be interesting to see how he looks in spring, but coming off the injury, it was just hard to nitpick too much. It was hard to see exactly what we have here because it was a small sample coming off injury. But did anything stand out to you in that small sample?
Yeah, he's 6'6". So you can see, and he had pre-Tommy John. He did get to the major league level, I think, with the Mariners, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a little bit of reverse karma there. given how they like to use our TOPA
Yeah.
pipeline, etc. So yeah, I think that sized extension likely there, and the fact that he's going to be healthy, hopefully, to start the season. There's
Mhm.
reason for more optimism than we would have, I think, and he has a little bit of a track record succeeding at American League, Major League level. So of the three guys, Stallings, McKendry, and McGee's the one I have the most hope in quotes for. I think that the McKendry trade originally for our catcher of yore kind of bared the fruition that you would want to see in that department. And the Rays and the
Mhm.
Brewers seem to have a very good serendipity when they trade, where it seems like it's very fair for both teams. Even though
Yeah.
Austin Jackson did not do a single thing of merit offensively, he gave them depth. And that's what Mr.
Yep.
McKendry likes to self-title him as the right-handed Robert Gasser, which is a stretch. But yeah.
Yes. Yes, it is a stretch. On the relief side of things, we've got, of course, Craig Yoho. Yoho, again, unbelievable season overall. The one thing that slipped in AAA were the walk numbers and the in zone rate a little bit. He got out of the zone. I think part of it was hitters being a little bit more willing to just take the very good changeup and breaking ball when they were out of the zone. I think part of it also may have been a little bit of fatigue setting in for a guy who had not even thrown. He had only thrown in the 30s for innings his entire college career, and he was up into the 40s and 50s in this season in 2024 by the time he got to AAA. So I think that played a role, but 100th percentile strikeout rate, 99.3 percentile whiff rate. He was incredible. We've talked about him a lot. Anything you want to add just from the AAA portion for him?
I mean, it's exactly that. He just looked a little fatigued by the end of it, didn't have the same life. And I just was like, okay, whatever, off season. We've seen enough. Just an absurd. That change up is just I think it's uncanny. Like as Wisconsin professional sports fans, it's uncanny to go from Favre to Rogers and the unknown of love, which we don't know, but then to go from Devin Williams to Yoho, the odds of getting a pseudo airbender within it doesn't even make sense to me. I'm like, how is that even possible?
No.
The two people on planet Earth who can throw a baseball like that happen to come to the Brew. Okay.
Yeah, it's an incredible pitch, and it's going to be very fun to, I would imagine, see it at some point next season in Milwaukee, and barring any health concerns. I don't think there's any real chance that he's not in Milwaukee at some point next year. Another name, very similar, I think it'd be pretty surprising if we don't see him to some degree in 2025. Jacob Mizorowski, again, we talked about him a lot on the last episode. I think the one thing to mention here in AAA is that he was out of the pen pretty much exclusively, like I mentioned, couple of games where he technically started, but it was just to shorten the pitch count and kind of start building him down into a relief role, get him used to a shorter stint while also giving him the ability to kind of get his normal warm up in before he has to go in and then get used to the reliever routine. I think they were hoping, or not hoping, but I think they were preparing in case they needed him to pitch in MLB last season. I think they would have been okay with doing that if needed. But they didn't end up needing to. The walk rate still too high, like we mentioned, but the whiff rates, the strikeout rates, everything about him outside of that is there's electric stuff. He showed it in AAA. He got up to 100.2. We saw the big time velo. We saw the breaking balls looking very good. There's a lot here. I think the relief role may end up being where it ends up showing out. I mean, if you're watching the video, you can see a 93 mile per hour slider there. Then he's throwing the mid 80s hammer of a curveball, which I actually think is his best breaking ball at this point. He is extremely talented on the mound. It's probably going to be a relief role next season at the very least. It wouldn't shock me if it's a relief role forever for him. But either way, no matter what the role is, he's going to be very valuable as long as he can just be somewhat near the zone consistently. It's going to be a problem for hitters. There's a very real Mason Miller type ceiling out of the pen here where it's just shut down stuff where nobody's touching him at the end of a game. I think that's kind of where I look at it. His stuff overall, just the fastball is very similar to Zach Wheeler in extension, in movement, and then it's 4 miles per hour harder. And Zach Wheeler's fastball is considered one of the best fastballs in baseball. So it's basically Zach Wheeler's fastball if Zach Wheeler always threw upper 90s, which, I mean, that's just absurd. So very excited about him still, but I do have to wonder, and I think we both agree on this, that the most likely outcome is going to be out of the pen. I don't think the Brewers will rule out starting for at least a year or two here, but I think most likely we're going to see him out of the pen. How about you?
Yeah, I think he's got a 2-year. I think it's going to be, if you look back to the success they had with Burns and Peralta, regardless of their starters arsenal, which are more evolved and more consistent than Mizorowski's, you just start him there anyhow. And it was night and day when he had lost his way a little bit with Biloxi. We've talked about that before with the catching, but he was wild. You can't have those random games as a starter where you're out of the game by the third inning because you've thrown 3 wild pitches, walked 6 guys, and plunked a couple. Like that's not going to work at the major league level. But in Nashville, he was deadly out of the pen, just deadly, and you saw it. And I said it from the moment they drafted him. I don't care if he ends up as a bullpen arm. He is a weapon. You need weapons everywhere in the pitching staff.
Yes.
Period. So if he's a guy who they call on in a playoff game to come in the 5th inning and pitch you 2-3 innings to get you to someone else, to Craig Yoho, I could care less. Great. His stuff is electric, but again, it's consistency. And he's 22. So plenty of time.
Yeah.
Plenty of time.
Yes. Yep. Next on the list, a name everybody in Milwaukee Brewers fandom knows well. Abner Uribe. He only threw 8 2/3 innings. We're not going to talk too much about what he did down there. I do want to note, despite the 1.04 ERA, the reason he was not quickly recalled, regardless of the injury he obviously ended up sustaining, was that none of what he was doing pointed to somebody who would have a 1.04 ERA. He was walking way too many people. He walked as many as he struck out. The ground ball rate was good. Other than that, I mean, it was a 5.07 FIP, and that's earned when you're walking the same amount as you're striking out. He's a guy you need to see more strikeouts from with the stuff he has. It just has to be there. It can't be that low with that type of stuff. More than anything with Abner Uribe, got to see some growth maturity-wise. And I think everyone knows that. I'm sure he's aware of it. It's just gotta be there. It was very ironically funny, I guess, when he got sent back down to AAA after getting suspended in MLB and had to serve his AAA suspension that he had got just before being promoted to MLB last season. And when he does get brought back to MLB, he will have to serve the suspension that he hasn't yet served. I think that says enough. I'm not going to dive too much into it, but we got to see some growth on the maturity side. And then on the pitching side, I really do think you have to strike more people out with the stuff you have. I know Murph said that wasn't a big deal, but if you're a closer, which they wanted him to be at the beginning of the season, there's got to be strikeouts. You cannot rely on defense, especially when you can throw 102 miles per hour. You got to find a way to get some strikeouts, to get some more whiff. The walks are going to be there, but they can't be what they were in AAA, which was over 7 per 9. He's got work to do. I know everyone's very excited about him, and I was too, and I still am. I think there's a huge ceiling here if he can hit it, but there's a lot of work to do with Abner Uribe, and on and off the field, not even off the field, I shouldn't say it that way, but on-field temperament and maturity is going to be a big thing for him. Anything else you want to add on Uribe there?
Well, yeah, with Abner, I have never had full confidence just because I've watched him since he's been a Brewer, and
yeah,
you never know. It's like a Yerlin Rodriguez type thing where not quite that bad in the minors, but you just never knew if he was going to keep it together. You had that a little bit with Miz. Thankfully, he had such a great close to his season. With Uribe and the Brewers, I should say, I do not like what they did to his arsenal last year. I don't like the shift away in the heaters. Like, they got rid of a pitch, and I'm not a fan. Part of his impact the year before was because he could give you a couple different looks with that heater. They went primary, and it got exposed. So I hope that as an organization, they work with him on getting back to his original mix. Because I fear if they don't do that, honestly, I'm just not as bullish. I'm just not. But again, I have never been as bullish because I was concerned about the makeup. He's got that classic Latin American flair, you could call it, machismo. Got to tone that down. And then I just really want to see them get back to the original mix that worked, because he was working with 3 pitches there that were really electric, and they played off each other. When you reduce that to 2 and you're dealing with his control issues, he's going to leave something exposed and it's going to get popped. And that's what I was seeing. So,
yeah. Other thing I would do is I think the slider should be the primary pitch for him, and the fastball should play off of the slider. I've been saying that since forever ago. I think the Edwin Diaz route is the best way to go. Diaz had his rough season because he was heavy fastball, and guys just started timing up the fastball. Then he went slider primarily, and all of a sudden the fastball plays up better because they're always having to wait on the 90-mile-per-hour slider, and then 100 fastball can sneak by him, get in on the hands. That's where I would go with Uribe. So
very good point. I've said the same thing about Peralta. When Peralta's really on, he's playing off speed first and then hitting you with that heater. But they see it. I see it occasionally. They should listen to us.
We had a question from Beater GB on Abner Uribe, but we covered all of it. So hopefully that answered what he was looking for. Blake Holub, we already talked about in AA. He was fantastic in Biloxi and the exact opposite in Nashville. We don't need to dive too deep into it, but somebody that I think there's stuff there. We talked about it on the Biloxi one. I think we both agree the pitch mix could be used better and the splitter could be used more often, and that there could just be a little bit better, the way they deploy him in AAA could improve, but I don't know if there's too much more to add on him. And we got one more guy left in Ryan Middendorf, another guy who results wise, it doesn't look very good. I can't quit Middendorf. He's a guy that I still think there's something there. It's such a funky delivery. The stuff is not bad. The strikeouts are in a reasonable spot. It's about a guy per inning, but the whiff rate was not where you'd want. The walks were too high. And he also was giving up homers. It's a bad combo. He was available all season. Obviously, he made 52 appearances. He was available pretty much anytime they needed him, which is a big thing for me. When I watch him and when I look at him, it reminds me of what Hobie was at times in the minors when he was coming through. Obviously, from the left side, this is righty in Middendorf, but it's a weird delivery. It's a guy who had trouble with homers. That's what Hobie was most of his minor league career. It seems like a profile the Brewers might be able to figure out with him. So that gives me some hope. But yeah, it wasn't a great season. What did you see from Middendorf this year?
Like you, I never quit on Middendorf. I love him. Man, just from his first days as an indie signing. He's got the size. He's got a really funky delivery, kind of like a 3/4 slot to sidearm almost. And gosh, last year he was touching 97, 98. And he's got a ripping slider. I think it's all this is like the Harold Torino thing we were talking about. He's got so many raw gifts. It's just a matter of finding how it works. And he's got too much raw talent there to just this is a pitcher. Again, this is why the numbers great. I throw it out the window. I saw the signs of even better stuff. Just time to start mirroring the results.
Yeah.
And I think he can do it. I think there's a major league arm in there, and I really hope he puts it together, because he's such a fun pitcher to watch. And I think when he first got into the org, he seemed to be a little looser in everything. I think the one gripe I have over the last 2 years, everything got a little too mechanical, got a little too tight. He lost some of that flair that made his stuff a little bit more special before. I can't put a name to it. I can't identify it. I'm sure people who have all the, yada, yada. But like you, I love him. And I just really hope he sees his best self.
Yeah. We had one more question on the Sounds. Again, this is kind of along the lines of what I talked about earlier. Is Brewers Bryce asking who or how would you rank or line up your starting rotation for AAA? Who are the first 2 to get called up? I'll take a crack at it just because like I said earlier, it's not something that I'm normally a huge fan of doing, but there are a lot of prospect pitchers here. So I think Chad Patrick, Jacob Mizorowski, Logan Henderson should all be starting to start the year, unless the Brewers completely give up on Mizorowski as a starter before the season, which I don't expect. Carlos Rodriguez is in there. My guess would be is they would run more of a 6-man rotation, and Davy Garcia and Bruce Zimmerman would be the final two. Given where they signed Zimmerman, I think they view him as starter depth. I think they're going to want Garcia to start, and I want Garcia to start, so I'm hoping they'll do that. And then to answer the other question, who the first two to get called up from the starting rotation, one, I would say Yoho to me might be the first one to get called up, and it would not surprise me at all, just overall, even though he's not on the 40-man. It would just take a little bit of a reliever issue, or he just dominates so quickly that they can't, they have to. But from that group, I think it's got to be Patrick and Henderson. Just they're two 40-man guys. Carlos Rodriguez has a case too. 40-man gives them the first look. That's just really usually how it's going to work. If Mizorowski came out and somehow just he's not walking anybody in the rotation and the stuff is where it's always been, then he's getting called up, and they're going to find room for him in the big leagues right away if they see that over the course of even just a month or so, because his stuff is that good. But I don't anticipate that. So I would go Patrick and Henderson. Anything different for you there, Joseph?
Yeah, they have a Vinny Natoli now, and they have a Thomas Pannoni.
Yeah.
Pannoni pitched fantastic for the Sounds 2 years ago. It's nice to have him back. It's just old, steady, reliable lefty. And then I just very curious to see where they place KC to start the year. I think they'll start him in Double-A, but I think he's going to be on fast track to get promoted early.
Yeah.
So yeah, those would be the only question marks there. And then so they have, in my mind, they have 7 guys to 8 guys they could work with there. So it's just a matter. Yeah, but in the beginning of the year, they just throw them out for 2-3 innings as they get their arms back. So it's needed. So we'll see. But yeah, as to call-ups, it's hard to disagree with. Patrick and Logan are on the 40-man, so is Carlos. So they'll likely get the first 3 shots.
Yeah.
Boy, it's gonna be very. And granted, like it was funny. I just looked at their roster. I still don't even look at their roster yet because there's still 2 more months. I don't know how they're gonna shape them. So.
Yeah,
we'll see. But this is where you start waxing poetic about the season that might be.
Absolutely. So we've got 3 more questions, I think. Yep, 3 more questions. Again, these were more opinion based, and I didn't want to touch on them before we got through all of the teams. But our first one is from J78 Shot asking, who are the dark horse pop out of nowhere prospects for next year? Looking for deep cuts if possible. So this is a fun one.
I have to bring my little thinking wizard cap on.
We had a similar question asked in the, actually, you know what? J78 Shop may have asked this question in the forums. But I am still partial to Marco Dingus. I don't know how much of deep cut that would technically be, but I really like the bat. And I think he's got the athleticism where I think he's going to be able to catch. I think the arm is good enough to do it. I have him as with a pop time of 1.85, which is in a pretty good spot. I don't know if that's the average or anywhere close to it, but I have one of him doing that, so it's pretty good. This is a deeper cut, handle fry Encarnacion in the DSL this year. I've got video of him with exit velos of over 107 miles per hour in some of their games last year. There's legit juice in the bat. He hits the ball in the air a ton, and he pulled it a decent amount, which is a good combo. And he walked more than he struck out in the DSL. To me, a lot of those things kind of scream a guy who he hit pretty well last year. Don't get me wrong. Like, he did well in the DSL. But it kind of screams somebody who might break out a little bit in year 2. Just a lot of good things there. And on the pitching side, I'll throw out Jaron DeBerry. I was a big fan of him in the draft. He was one of the guys I named as a potential Brewers pick. He did not really end up pitching. We didn't get to see him pitch in pro ball, but just everything about him screams Brewers pitcher and good pitcher development guy for them. He has a ton of solid pitches. He throws 6, and they all, for me, are at least close to average or better at times. The 4-seam has the type of good shape because he gets a good low release point. He's got a really good sweeper, best pitch for me. Good cutter, curveball's good. Changeup and 2-seam probably lag behind a little bit. It's actually kind of like a Robert Gasser from the right side now that I'm laying it all out. He did not walk. He has good command. velo's in the low 90s, but he's very thin, and I think there might be some velo jump in him in pro ball. I was a big fan of this pick. He was a super low signing bonus guy. He was a 4-year guy, so not shocking, but for me, he'd be one that I just would not be surprised at all to see perform really well in his first season and move a couple levels and jump onto some top 30s, as people like to refer to them as. But how about you, Joseph? What would you call out as some, maybe one, however many you have, dark horse pop out of nowhere prospects?
Ooh. As I told Spencer before we started this episode, I haven't looked at any of the questions, so I'm coming in here raw, which is fun. Well, I think right off the bat, I got to go back to my guy, Tanner Shears. He's coming back. Tanner Shears, to me, oh man, words cannot describe how much I like watching that splitter. It is it is the knuckliest knuckle splitter of all. It is such a fantastic pitch, and he throws like 95, 96. Oh lordy, I hope he comes back and he's touching 98, throwing darts. Oh baby, Tanner Shears is like probably the player I am most excited to see healthy. But then, boy, I really want to see Tyler Rodriguez, what he's capable of. All the clips I saw from the ACL, I just saw an athletic guy moving. I want to see Adam Shefsky back healthy. What I saw with his bat to begin his work in Carolina was phenomenal. Love his lefty stroke. He's got pop that we more than we thought. Ramon Rodriguez, year 2. I saw enough that, and they protect him in Rule 5 as well as David Garcia. But Ramon Rodriguez, I think, is an unheralded, uber talented switch hitting, if I recall correctly. God, it's been a while. Catcher, and he can just do it all. And then I'm going to just say this. I'm excited to see Anthony Siegler play second base. I just want to see what we have here. It's going to be fun. He hit like 235 last year, which is kind of par for the course for him, but it's his first year in field as primary, and his BABIP wasn't great. So I just want to see what's going on there. I think he could surprise for some reason. And also this is, I've told Spencer this before, but I have contacts in the Yankees org, and so I have little whispers that can actually give me information. They gave it to me with Perkins, and so with Ziegler, I think there's a little bit more there, and I think it was an atrophy of a former prospect who got caught in a numbers game, and I think that there might be an unknown, untapped actual player here. So pretty excited to see that. If Hayden Robinson were healthy, he'd be front and center for me, just from what I saw in the ACL. But those are my guys off the top of my head. Look at that. Oh, man, Tanner Shears. Oh, yeah.
I'm throwing some Shears video
look
up
at that
for
ball.
you.
Just look at that thing, man.
Yeah.
And of course, Matt Wood dropped it.
It's disgusting stuff. I am
in 2023,
very excited about him.
Oh my gosh. In 2023, there was not a pitcher in the minors I saw in all the games I watched the umps miss calls on. They didn't know what he was doing. So they didn't know where the ball was going to go. And I guarantee that, and that's what I would say that was Swaim in the forums. It's just like, look, the walk rate, all that stuff, to throw it out the window.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. All right. Brewers Rice asked us, as far as high ceiling, meaning, potential 1 or 2 starters, who's next after Mizorowski? If ceilings get reached on any of the AAA starters, are there any possible 1-2 starters besides Miz? Don't get me wrong. Most didn't even peg Woodruff or Burns as potential 1 or 2. He asks, did you guys? Who might we be missing that has that potential? So first on Woodruff and Burns. So I actually saw both of them pitch live in Appleton. This was when I was in high school, technically. Or probably going into my college. I don't know. It was the summer, maybe after my senior year of high school. So not quite my highest potential scouting time as a guy going to these games, but I was definitely going interested in minor league players, and I saw both of them pitch. Woodruff looked the part to me, like right away. He really did. He had the velo. He had the breaking balls. He was not walking many guys at that time. And the day I saw him, he dominated. The day I saw Burns, it was the year he got drafted. He was pitching out of the pen. It looked like that was more going to be his future role at that time. The cutter velo was like 91, 92, 93 that day. He looked like a fine pitcher to me, but I definitely did not see that coming. Now, by the time he was in AAA, I had pretty high hopes for Burns as a legitimate starter. It felt like one of the few. I don't think I was one of the few, but that 2019 season, I remained very, very high on Corbin Burns, thinking that we were going to get a good pitcher out of him, regardless of how that season was going. Woody, I would say, honestly, I did think Woodruff could be a top of the rotation guy. I don't think I ever got to that point with Burns in the minors. I especially didn't when they were in the lower levels. But Woodruff kind of convinced me early on that he could be. On the other note, I don't know that AAA has anybody that I view as a potential 1 or 2 starter outside of Miz if they reach their ceiling. Even Henderson, if he adds a breaking ball, I don't think he'll ever get to that point. I love Casey Hunt. I don't think he's got like that full-blown top of the rotation potential at the upper levels. I think you got to go to the lower levels and look at a guy who has a ton of development left in maybe a Bishop Letson, somebody who has crazy extension, kind of like Mizorowski. He made a big velo jump already. It might be possible there's more in the tank for a guy that young. And I think he's going to have average or better command long-term, which gives him a huge, huge ceiling with multiple pitches, two different fastballs, a good slider, a good changeup. To me, in terms of pure ceiling, who I've already seen in pro ball, like Message is going to be an interesting one to watch. Josh Noth is definitely in the conversation as well at this point in his career. But I think Letson, with his frame and everything else, just screams like highest potential, low floor still, don't get me wrong, but highest actual ceiling of anybody that I watched this season is Letson for me. So Joseph, on those questions, anything different for you? Anything you saw from Woodruff and Burns when they were in the minors that made you think they'd ever be?
No, I kind of see them exactly the same. I can remember, like Woody just popped.
Yeah.
He had that build, and he just has that southern drawl you love. You know, it's funny, as I heard the question originally, I was like, I can't believe we didn't say Wandy Torres. My goodness, we're going to see him.
Yeah.
God, I cannot wait to see him throw 98 miles per hour from the left. I tend to think so. For me, I tend to be even more bullish on Casey Hunt, and it's just because he has a closer's history. He has a confidence that you just do not see in guys. When he pitches, he's got his gold chain dangling. He's got buttons down to here. His hair, mullets flowing. That is just a man to me that screams overperformer. I could very easily see him exceeding even our expectations. I could see KC in an ideal situation dial his stuff even further and becoming like a glorified number 2. I just could. And that's just because of my faith in him. And granted, this is only seeing him one season. I haven't really seen him face adversity because, well, he just mowed everyone, every level, double A included, playoffs included. My God, he was like, so it's just a stud. I really like Tate Keener, but he really faded, and so I lost a little bit of the luster there. Will he be anything more than a number 4 down the line? I don't know. I think it's hard beyond Miz and the glorification of a Casey Hunt. Then you're looking, on those low. I'm a firm believer in Jason Woodward. Holy cow! What I saw from him last year, that was just, he was pitching different than most of the Brewers that came through last year. Violent, tight, just high velo and room to grow. I was super bullish, even with the injury and the early departure. Boy, I really wish I could dream into Lavonis, but alas,
I know.
Here we are. that was a rough. I was like,
he would have been my pick for sure.
Oh man. But I think there's, we said it to start this pod series, and I just feel like closing thoughts, man, is that those lower levels continue to just be filled with intrigue. So we're going to have to keep our eyes open and, nose and ears to the grindstone, as they say, as we try to just learn about what they're capable of this season. So I think I would also add, there's players that we haven't mentioned that are going to pop on the radar. They just do every year.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah. 100%. We have one more question and then we will be done with this whole series. This is our longest episode. Not surprising. We fit in a ton of extra questions.
Yeah, come
but
on. And
Peter
we're wrapping
GB
it up.
asked us, who are your favorite undrafted free agents from the past few years and favorite indie ball signings? I know Joseph loves Gardner, he noted. I'm a big Gardner fan as well, but I think undrafted free agent has to be Casey Hunt. I mean, it's been absolutely absurd what he's done the last couple of years, but Shane Smith and Will Childers are legitimately very fun undrafted free agent guys as well. Indie ball, I'm probably stealing both of his answers here, but it is Tanner Shears and Chase Costello for me. Both are, I mean, they're both just so fun. We showed the Shears video. We showed Costello at other points. We talked about him a lot. But they continue to find value in places that teams just don't look. I just quickly story I remember seeing on Twitter when Topa was getting traded, Kyle Body, who runs Driveline and founded it, and one of the main guys there talked about how it was under a thread of Topa, just how good he looks and everything, and it was him just praising the Brewers. He said a lot of organizations will sign these indie ball guys and these undrafted free agents, and then they will not give them the time of day. He said they won't work with them. They're just like, well, you can't figure it out. Well, you're gone. You're cut. So the Brewers treat every single prospect very similarly, and that these guys get legitimate opportunities when they come in. And a guy like Topa, he said he needed that. The Brewers worked with him. They figured some stuff out and made him a legitimate MLB reliever. Obviously, health has been really hard for Topa, and it hasn't worked out exactly how he probably would have hoped. But the guy went from indie ball to being a major league reliever without any shadow of a doubt. Every team that has acquired him wants him in the majors. He just hasn't been able to stick sometimes because of injury. They do that with these guys, and that's why they get the results they get. And they try a lot of them out, but you'll notice that they're not cutting any of these guys after 3 weeks of struggles after they signed them. Gardner did not get off to a good start after signing and coming up to Appleton. No. It was not great.
You could tell he was nervous.
Yeah. And there are organizations who would have been like, well, the stuff's okay, but we have other prospects we want to cycle through and we're going to move on. And I mean, Body is very in tune with MLB and the fact that he very specifically singled out the Brewers as a good landing spot for these guys. I bet that didn't go unnoticed by indie ball guys. I bet it didn't go unnoticed by indie ball organizations who want to help get their guys to organizations. And I think that's part of the reason the Brewers continue to have success with it, is that they are seen as probably the premier landing spot for an indie ball signing, because they're going to treat them with legitimate respect, just like every other prospect in the organization, and give them the time of day and work with them and try to maximize what they have and realize that they're not a finished product. I think some teams are signing these guys like, well, they're 27. They pretty much are what they are. And
right.
Brewers do not view it that way. Pitching prospects especially always can get better. We've seen guys like Charlie Morton start throwing 6 miles per hour harder in his 30s. Like it never stops for pitchers. So I think the Brewers are well aware of it. We talked about untapped markets that they do a really good job of tapping into. This is a really big one, and there's a lot of good options here. So, Joseph, I'm sure I stole most of yours there, but any other names you want to throw out for those two categories?
Well, yeah, just in terms of like what a pitcher can add. I mean, look no further than a guy who was with the Brewers in 2023, and Robert Stock. I've been waxing poetic on him. He won the Mexican Winter League pitcher of the year. He looks like a completely different pitcher. Just a bit over a year. I mean, I'm telling you, his stuff was moving crazy. Just, it's hard to fathom. And he said that he's been working on it for 4 years. Now he got a minor league, re-signed with the Red Sox for the second time with a big league invite. Anyhow, goodness, it's hard to pick guys per se above and beyond who you selected, but just think about the Nick Merkles, the Reese Wallings. You got Tyler Bryant last year, Bo Bowman doing great in Biloxi. You got James Meeker, even though he was released, had a great run with the Brewers. Ryan Middendorf, still love him. He's had a great run. Daryl Thompson, God bless him. May he find a team this year. He left because he wanted a better opportunity. He hasn't found it yet, but man, it was good for Biloxi, and then started finding the groove in Nashville. I think we got Aaron Rund. It was fantastic for the T-Rats last year. I mean, it's just, there's no end to their ability to find these guys and give them legitimate opportunities. And I think that's the with the stateside roster limits, it goes both ways. Guys then go into indie ball, but they need to know that it's worth something. And the Brewers are one of those lighthouses to that end. And these guys come aboard and they give meaningful playoff innings, for crying out loud. It's just super impressive. And so every season now I come in and of course our one lone missed opportunity this past year was they didn't go to Australia. And typically the running joke has been we've won the reliever of the year or the pitcher of the year 2 years running. So who was it going to be? My early hat in the ring was Tyler Bryant, but nobody went. So we didn't get that fairy tale ending. So now the question is, who are they going to sign this season? And so they just got Ryan Sandberg's son, which clearly means he's going to become a Cy Young candidate. We know that's how it works, right? So yeah, it'll just be who do they get next? Really, and we know there's more than likely going to be 2 to 3 at least. So
yeah,
we'll just have to wait and see.
Indeed. Well, we made it. This is the end of episode 5. We have we've talked to you for now over, well over 10 hours worth of time over 5 episodes. So for those of you who have legitimately listened to all of these, I first of all tip my cap to you because that's impressive on your part. But we thank you all for listening. We've gotten some really nice feedback from a lot of you. We really appreciate that. It's been awesome. I'm glad people are enjoying it. I think this is definitely something we're going to have to do every year. Maybe we'll find a way to shorten it up a little bit, but at the same time, most of you have told us you don't care. So we appreciate that as well. Obviously, I think it shines through how much we care about this stuff and how much fun we had doing it. So hopefully everybody enjoyed it. Joseph, anything you want to say before we sign off for the last time?
Yeah, I just want to close by just bringing it full circle again. This is a great time to be a Brewers fan. And I really hope that as this next season approaches, that we can, as a community of fans, we can encourage the discourse about supporting this organization and embracing the organization over finding ways to complain about things that actually aren't even true. So we know we have a small market franchise. That's the nature of the way it is. However, we also have a small market franchise that is supremely good at upper echelon at exploiting and maximizing these market inefficiencies. That's what any good business does in any field. So even though this sounds like a prepared statement, it isn't. I'm just encourage you all to celebrate the minor leagues with us, celebrate the paths the Brewers take to get there, celebrate this newly developing Dominican Academy that got us a player like Jackson Churio on an incredibly valuable contract, and see that there's many ways to skin a cat, as they say, and the Brewers have many ways. And let's just hope that we strike gold this year, we stay healthy, and there's that team to the south of us that I shan't name that. Well, let's just hope we have a better record at the end of the year. And then, in the postseason, let's be honest, we were a mislocated Hall of Fame reliever pitch away from getting past the Mets. We all know it.
Yep.
It was right there, and it just didn't happen. And that's baseball. And so let's hope we get there again. Let's hope they get another opportunity again.
Agreed. Thank you all for listening. Myself and Jack, we will be back in about 2 weeks. And then once we get into spring training, most likely we'll be coming back to more of a week-by-week podcast format instead of every 2 weeks. But again, thank you all for listening. This has been a ton of fun for both of us. And I hope you guys all enjoyed it too. Go Brewers.
Woo!